The Critic as Artist, with some remarks on the importance of doing nothing, by Oscar Wilde. A Dialogue, Part 1. Persons, Gilbert and Ernest. Scene, the library of a house in Piccadilly, overlooking the Green Park. Gilbert at the piano. My dear Ernest, what are you laughing at? Ernest, looking up, at a capital story that I have just come across in this volume of reminiscences that I have found on your table. Gilbert, what is the book? Ah, I see. I have not read it yet. Is it good? Ernest, well, while you have been playing, I've been turning over the pages with some amusement, though, as a rule, I dislike modern memoirs. They are generally written by people who have either entirely lost their memories or have never done anything worth remembering, which, however, is, no doubt, the true explanation of their popularity, as the English public always feels perfectly at its ease when a mediocrity is talking to it. Gilbert, yes, the public is wonderfully tolerant. It forgives everything except genius. But I must confess that I like all memoirs. I like them for their form, just as much as for their matter. In literature, mere egotism is delightful. It is what fascinates us in the letters of personalities so different as Cicero and Balzac, Flaubert and Berlioz, Byron and Madame de Sévigné. Whenever we come across it, and strangely enough it is rather rare, we cannot but welcome it, and do not easily forget it. Humanity will always love Rousseau for having confessed his sins, not to a priest, but to the world, and the couchant nymphs that Cellini wrought in bronze for the castle of King Francis, the green and gold Perseus even, that in the open loggia at Florence shows the moon the dead terror that once turned life to stone, have not given it more pleasure than has that autobiography in which the supreme scoundrel of the Renaissance relates the story of his splendor and his shame. The opinions, the character, the achievements of the man matter very little. He may be a skeptic like the gentle Sieur de Montaigne, or a saint like the bitter son of Monica, but when he tells us his own secrets, he can always charm our ears to listening and our lips to silence. The mode of thought that Cardinal Newman represented, if that can be called a mode of thought, which seeks to solve intellectual problems by a denial of the supremacy of the intellect, cannot, I think, survive. But the world will never weary of watching that troubled soul in its progress from darkness to darkness. The lonely church at Littlemore, where the breath of the morning is damp and worshippers are few, will always be dear to it, and whenever men see the yellow snapdragon blossoming on the wall of Trinity, they will think of that gracious undergraduate who saw in the flower's sure recurrence a prophecy that he would abide forever with the benign mother of his days, a prophecy that faith, in her wisdom or her folly, suffered not to be fulfilled. Yes, autobiography is irresistible. Poor, silly, conceited Mr. Secretary Pepys has chattered his way into the circle of the immortals, and, conscious that indiscretion is the better part of valor, bustles about among them in that shaggy purple gown with gold buttons and looped lace, which he is so fond of describing to us, perfectly at his ease and prattling, to his own and our infinite pleasure, of the Indian blue petticoat that he bought for his wife, of the good hog's harslet, and the pleasant French fricassee of veal that he loved to eat, of his game of bowls with Will Joyce, and his gadding after beauties, and his reciting of Hamlet on a Sunday, and his playing on the viol on weekdays, and other wicked or trivial things. Even in actual life, egotism is not without its attractions. When people talk to us about others, they are usually dull. When they talk to us about themselves, they are nearly always interesting, and if someone could shut them up, when they become wearisome, as easily as one can shut up a book of which one has grown wearied, they would be perfect absolutely. Ernest, there is much virtue in that if, as Touchstone would say, but do you seriously propose that every man should become his own Boswell? What would become of our industrious compilers of lives and recollections in that case? Gilbert, what has become of them? They are the pest of the age, nothing more and nothing less. Every great man nowadays has his disciples, and it is always Judas who writes the biography. Ernest, my dear fellow. Gilbert, I am afraid it is true. Formerly we used to canonize our heroes. The modern method is to vulgarize them. Cheap editions of great books may be delightful, but cheap editions of great men are absolutely detestable. Ernest, may I ask, Gilbert, to whom you allude? Gilbert, oh, to all our second-rate littérateurs. We are overrun by a set of people who, when poet or painter passes away, arrive at the house along with the undertaker, and forget that their one duty is to behave as mutes. But we won't talk about them. They are the mere body snatchers of literature. The dust is given to one, and the ashes to another, and the soul is out of their reach. And now let me play Chopin for you, or Dvorak. Shall I play you a fantasy by Dvorak? He writes passionate, curiously colored things. Ernest: No, I don't want music just at present. It is far too indefinite. Besides, I took the Baroness Bernstein down to dinner last night, and, though absolutely charming in every other respect, she insisted on discussing music as if it were actually written in the German language. Now, whatever music sounds like, I am glad to say that it does not sound in the smallest degree like German. There are forms of patriotism that are really quite degrading. No, Gilbert, don't play any more. Turn round and talk to me. Talk to me till the white-horned day comes into the room. There is something in your voice that is wonderful. Gilbert, rising from the piano: I'm not in a mood for talking tonight. I really am not. How horrid of you to smile. Where are the cigarettes? Thanks. How exquisite these single daffodils are. They seem to be made of amber and cool ivory. They are like Greek things of the best period. What was the story in the Confessions of the remorseful academician that made you laugh? Tell it to me. After playing Chopin, I feel as if I had been weeping over sins that I had never committed, and mourning over tragedies that were not my own. Music always seems to me to produce that effect. It creates for one a past of which one has been ignorant, and fills one with a sense of sorrows that have been hidden from one's tears. I can fancy a man who led a perfectly commonplace life, hearing by chance some curious piece of music, and suddenly discovering that his soul, without his being conscious of it, had passed through terrible experiences, and known fearful joys, or wild romantic loves, or great renunciations. And so tell me this story, Ernest. I want to be amused. Ernest: Oh, I don't know if it is of any importance, but I thought it a really admirable illustration of the true value of ordinary art criticism. It seems that a lady once gravely asked the remorseful academician, as you call him, if his celebrated picture of A Spring Day at Whitley's, or Waiting for the Last Omnibus, or some subject of that kind, was all painted by hand. Gilbert: And was it? Ernest: You are quite incorrigible. But seriously speaking, what is the use of art criticism? Why cannot the artist be left alone, to create a new world if he wishes it, or if not, to shadow forth the world which we already know, and of which, I fancy, we would each one of us be wearied if art, with her fine spirit of choice and delicate instinct of selection, did not, as it were, purify it for us, and give to it a momentary perfection. It seems to me that the imagination spreads, or should spread, a solitude around it, and works best in silence and in isolation. Why should the artist be troubled by the shrill clamor of criticism? Why should those who cannot create take upon themselves to estimate the value of creative work? What can they know about it? If a man's work is easy to understand, an explanation is unnecessary. Gilbert: And if his work is incomprehensible, an explanation is wicked. Ernest: I did not say that. Gilbert: But you should have. Nowadays, we have so few mysteries left to us that we cannot afford to part with one of them. The members of the Browning Society, like the theologians of the Broad Church party, or the authors of Mr. Walter Scott's Great Writers series, seem to me to spend their time in trying to explain their divinity away. Where one had hoped that Browning was a mystic, they have sought to show that he was simply inarticulate. Where one had fancied that he had something to conceal, they have proved that he had but little to reveal. But I speak merely of his incoherent work. Taken as a whole, the man was great. He did not belong to the Olympians, and had all the incompleteness of the Titans. He did not survey, and it was but rarely that he could sing. His work is marred by struggle, violence, and effort, and he passed not from emotion to form, but from thought to chaos. Still, he was great. He has been called a thinker, and was certainly a man who was always thinking, and always thinking aloud. But it was not thought that fascinated him, but rather the processes by which thought moves. It was the machine he loved, not what the machine makes. The method by which the fool arrives at his folly was as dear to him as the ultimate wisdom of the wise. So much, indeed, did the subtle mechanism of mind fascinate him that he despised language, or looked upon it as an incomplete instrument of expression. Rhyme, that exquisite echo which in the muse's hollow hill creates and answers its own voice, Rhyme, which in the hands of the real artist, becomes not merely a material element of metrical beauty, but a spiritual element of thought and passion also, waking a new mood, it may be, or stirring a fresh train of ideas, or opening by mere sweetness and suggestion of sound some golden door at which the imagination itself has knocked in vain. Rhyme, which can turn man's utterance to the speech of gods. Rhyme, the one chord we have added to the Greek lyre, became in Robert Browning's hands a grotesque, misshapen thing, which at times made him masquerade in poetry as a low comedian, and ride Pegasus too often with his tongue in his cheek. There are moments when he wounds us by monstrous music. Nay, if he can only get his music by breaking the strings of his lute, he breaks them, and they snap in discord, and no Athenian tetics, making melody from tremulous wings, lights on the ivory horn to make the movement perfect, or the interval less harsh. Yet he was great, and though he turned language into ignoble clay, he made from it men and women that live. He is the most Shakespearean creature since Shakespeare. If Shakespeare could sing with myriad lips, Browning could stammer through 1,000 mouths. Even now, as I am speaking, and speaking not against him but for him, there glides through the room the pageant of his persons. There creeps Frau Lippo-Lippi with his cheeks still burning from some girl's hot kiss. There stands dread Saul with the lordly male sapphires gleaming in his turban. Mildred Thresham is there, and the Spanish monk, yellow with hatred, and Blugram and Benzera in the Bishop of St. Praxed's. The spawn of Setebos gibbers in the corner, and Sebald, hearing Pippa pass by, looks at Ottima's haggard face, and loathes her and his own sin, and himself. Pale as the white satin of his doublet, the melancholy king watches with dreamy, treacherous eyes too loyal Strafford pass forth to his doom, and Andrea shudders as he hears the cousin's whistle in the garden, and bids his perfect wife go down. Yes, Browning was great, and as what will he be remembered? As a poet? Not as a poet. He will be remembered as a writer of fiction, as the most supreme writer of fiction, it may be, that we have ever had. His sense of dramatic situation was unrivaled, and if he could not answer his own problems, he could at least put problems forth, and what more should an artist do? Considered from the point of view of a creator of character, he ranks next to him who made Hamlet. Had he been articulate, he might have sat beside him. The only man who can touch the hem of his garment is George Meredith. Meredith is a prose Browning, and so is Browning. He used poetry as a medium for writing in prose. Ernest, there is something in what you say, but there is not everything in what you say. In many points you are unjust. Gilbert, it is difficult not to be unjust to what one loves. But let us return to the particular point at issue. What was it that you said? Ernest, simply this, that in the best days of art there were no art critics. Gilbert, I seem to have heard that observation before, Ernest. It has all the vitality of error and all the tediousness of an old friend. Ernest, it is true, yes. There is no use tossing your head in that petulant manner. It is quite true. In the best days of art there were no art critics. The sculptor hewed from the marble block the great white-limbed Hermes that slept within it. The waxers and gilders of images gave tone and texture to the statue, and the world, when it saw it, worshipped and was dumb. He poured the glowing bronze into the mold of sand, and the river of red metal cooled into noble curves and took the impress of the body of a god. With enamel or polished jewels he gave sight to the sightless eyes. The hyacinth-like curls grew crisp beneath his graver, and when, in some dim frescoed fane or pillared sunlit portico, the child of Leto stood upon his pedestal, those who passed by became conscious of a new influence that had come across their lives, and dreamily, or with a sense of strange and quickening joy, went to their homes or daily labor, or wandered, it may be, through the city gates to that nymph-haunted meadow where young Phaedrus bathed his feet, and lying there on the soft grass, beneath the tall wind-whispering planes and flowering Agnus Castus, began to think of the wonder of beauty, and grew silent with unaccustomed awe. In those days the artist was free. From the river valley he took the fine clay in his fingers, and with a little tool of wood or bone, fashioned it into forms so exquisite that the people gave them to the dead as their playthings, and we find them still in the dusty tombs on the yellow hillside by Tanagra, with the faint gold and the fading crimson still lingering about hair and lips and raiment. On a wall of fresh plaster, stained with bright sandix or mixed with milk and saffron, He pictured one who trod with tired feet the purple white-starred fields of asphodel, one in whose eyelids lay the whole of the Trojan War, Polyxena, the daughter of Priam, or figured Odysseus, the wise and cunning, bound by tight cords to the mast-step, that he might listen without hurt to the singing of the sirens, or wandering by the clear river of Acheron, where the ghosts of fishes flitted over the pebbly bed, or showed the Persian in trews and mitre, flying before the Greek at Marathon, or the galleys clashing their beaks of brass in the little Salaminian bay. He drew with silver point and charcoal upon parchment and prepared cedar. Upon ivory and rose-colored terracotta he painted with wax, making the wax fluid with juice of olives, and with heated irons making it firm. Panel and marble and linen canvas became wonderful as his brush swept across them, and life, seeing her own image, was still and dared not speak. All life indeed was his, from the merchant seated in the marketplace to the cloaked shepherd lying on the hill, from the nymph hidden in the laurels and the fawn that pipes at noon, to the king whom, in long green-curtained litter, slaves bore upon oil-bright shoulders, and fanned with peacock fans. Men and women, with pleasure or sorrow in their faces, passed before him. He watched them, and their secret became his. Through form and color he recreated a world. All subtle art belongs to him also. He held the gem against the revolving disk, and the amethyst became the purple couch for Adonis, and across the veined sardines sped Artemis with her hounds. He beat out the gold into roses, and strung them together for necklace or armlet. He beat out the gold into wreaths for the conqueror's helmet, or into palmates for the Tyrian robe, or into masks for the royal dead. On the back of the silver mirror he graved Thetis borne by her nereids, or lovesick Phaedra with her nurse, or Persephone, weary of memory, putting poppies in her hair. The potter sat in his shed, and, flower-like from the silent wheel, the vase rose up beneath his hands. He decorated the base and stem and ears with pattern of dainty olive leaf, or foliated acanthus, or curved and crested wave. Then in black or red he painted lads wrestling, or in the race, knights in full armor, with strange heraldic shields and curious visors, leaning from shell-shaped chariot over rearing steeds, the gods seated at the feast or working their miracles, the heroes in their victory or in their pain. Sometimes he would etch in thin vermilion lines upon a ground of white the languid bridegroom and his bride, with arrows hovering round them, and arrows like one of Donatello's angels, a little laughing thing with gilded or with azure wings. On the curved side he would write the name of his friend. Beautiful Alcibiades, or beautiful Charmides, tells us the story of his days. Again, on the rim of the wide flat cup he would draw the stag browsing or the lion at rest, as his fancy willed it. From the tiny perfume bottle laughed Aphrodite at her toilet, and, with bare-limbed Maiaids in his train, Dionysus danced round the wine-jar on naked must-stained feet, while satyr-like, the old Sinellus sprawled upon the bloated skins, or shook that magic spear which was tipped with a fretted fir cone, and wreathed with dark ivy. And no one came to trouble the artist at his work. No irresponsible chatter disturbed him. He was not worried by opinions. By the Ilyssus, says Arnold somewhere, there was no Higginbotham. By the Ilyssus, my dear Gilbert, there were no silly art congresses bringing provincialism to the provinces and teaching the mediocrity how to mouth. By the Ilyssus, there were no tedious magazines about art, in which the industrious prattle of what they do not understand. On the reed-grown banks of that little stream strutted no ridiculous journalism monopolizing the seat of judgment when it should be apologizing in the dock. The Greeks had no art critics. Gilbert, Ernest, you are quite delightful, but your views are terribly unsound. I am afraid that you have been listening to the conversation of someone older than yourself. That is always a dangerous thing to do, and if you allow it to degenerate into a habit, you will find it absolutely fatal to any intellectual development. As for modern journalism, it is not my business to defend it. It justifies its own existence by the great Darwinian principle of the survival of the vulgarist. I have merely to do with literature. Ernest, but what is the difference between literature and journalism? Gilbert, oh, journalism is unreadable, and literature is not read. That is all. But with regard to your statement that the Greeks had no art critics, I assure you that is quite absurd. It would be more just to say that the Greeks were a nation of art critics. Ernest, really? Gilbert, yes, a nation of art critics. But I don't wish to destroy the delightfully unreal picture that you have drawn of the relation of the Hellenic artist to the intellectual spirit of his age. To give an accurate description of what has never occurred is not merely the proper occupation of the historian, but the inalienable privilege of any man of parts and culture. Still less do I desire to talk learnedly. Learned conversation is either the affectation of the ignorant or the profession of the mentally unemployed. And as for what is called improving conversation, that is merely the foolish method by which the still more foolish philanthropist feebly tries to disarm the just rancor of the criminal classes. No, let me play to you some mad scarlet thing by Dvorak. The pallid figures on the tapestry are smiling at us, and the heavy eyelids of my bronze Narcissus are folded in sleep. Don't let us discuss anything solemnly. I am but too conscious of the fact that we are born in an age when only the dull are treated seriously, and I live in terror of not being misunderstood. Don't degrade me into the position of giving you useful information. Education is an admirable thing, but it is well to remember from time to time that nothing that is worth knowing can be taught. Through the parted curtains of the window I see the moon like a clipped piece of silver. Like gilded bees the stars cluster round her. The sky is a hard hollow sapphire. Let us go out into the night. Thought is wonderful, but adventure is more wonderful still. Who knows but we may meet Florizel of Bohemia, and hear the fair Cuban tell us that she is not what she seems. Ernest, you are horribly willful. I insist on your discussing this matter with me. You have said that the Greeks were a nation of art critics. What art criticism have they left us? Gilbert, my dear Ernest, even if not a single fragment of art criticism had come down to us from Hellenic or Hellenistic days, it would be nonetheless true that the Greeks were a nation of art critics, and that they invented the criticism of art just as they invented the criticism of everything else. For, after all, what is our primary debt to the Greeks? Simply the critical spirit. And this spirit, which they exercised on questions of religion and science, of ethics and metaphysics, of politics and education, they exercised on questions of art also, and indeed, on the two supreme and highest arts, they have left us the most flawless system of criticism that the world has ever seen. Ernest, but what are the two supreme and highest arts? Gilbert, life and literature, life and the perfect expression of life. The principles of the former, as laid down by the Greeks, we may not realize in an age so marred by false ideals as our own. The principles of the latter, as they laid them down, are, in many cases, so subtle that we can hardly understand them. Recognizing that the most perfect art is that which most fully mirrors man in all his infinite variety, they elaborated the criticism of language, considered in the light of the mere material of that art, to a point to which we, with our accentual system of reasonable or emotional emphasis, can barely, if at all, attain, studying, for instance, the metrical movements of a prose as scientifically as a modern musician studies harmony and counterpoint, and, I need hardly say, with much keener aesthetic instinct. In this they were right, as they were right in all things. Since the introduction of printing, and the fatal development of the habit of reading amongst the middle and lower classes of this country, there has been a tendency in literature to appeal more and more to the eye, and less to the ear, which is really the sense which, from the standpoint of pure art, it should seek to please, and by whose canons of pleasure it should abide always. Even the work of Mr. Pater, who is, on the whole, the most perfect master of English prose now creating amongst us, is often far more like a piece of mosaic than a passage in music, and seems, here and there, to lack the true rhythmical life of words and the fine freedom and richness of effect that such rhythmical life produces. We, in fact, have made writing a definite mode of composition, and have treated it as a form of elaborate design. The Greeks, upon the other hand, regarded writing simply as a method of chronicling. Their test was always the spoken word in its musical and metrical relations. The voice was the medium, and the ear the critic. I have sometimes thought that the story of Homer's blindness might be really an artistic myth, created in critical days, and serving to remind us, not merely that the great poet is always a seer, seeing less with the eyes of the body than he does with the eyes of the soul, but that he is a true singer also, building his song out of music, repeating each line over and over again to himself till he has caught the secret of its melody, chanting in darkness the words that are winged with light. Certainly, whether this be so or not, it was to his blindness as an occasion, if not as a cause, that England's great poet owed much of the majestic movement and sonorous splendor of his later verse. When Milton could no longer write, he began to sing. Who would match the measures of Comus with the measures of Samson Agonistes, or of Paradise Lost or Regained? When Milton became blind, he composed, as everyone should compose, with the voice purely, and so the pipe or reed of earlier days became the mighty many-stopped organ, whose rich reverberant music has all the stateliness of Homeric verse, if it seeks not to have its swiftness, and is the one imperishable inheritance of English literature sweeping through all the ages, because above them, and abiding with us ever, being immortal in its form. Yes, writing has done much harm to writers. We must return to the voice. That must be our test, and perhaps then we shall be able to appreciate some of the subtleties of Greek art criticism. As it now is, we cannot do so. Sometimes, when I have written a piece of prose that I have been modest enough to consider absolutely free from fault, a dreadful thought comes over me that I may have been guilty of the immoral effeminacy of using trochaic or tribrachic movements, a crime for which a learned critic of the Augustan age censures with most just severity the brilliant, if somewhat paradoxical, Hegesias. I grow cold when I think of it, and wonder to myself if the admirable ethical effect of the prose of that charming writer, who once in a spirit of reckless generosity towards the uncultivated portion of our community proclaimed the monstrous doctrine that conduct is 3/4 of life, will not someday be entirely annihilated by the discovery that the peons have been wrongly placed. Ernest, now you are flippant. Gilbert, who would not be flippant when he is gravely told that the Greeks had no art critics? I can understand it being said that the constructive genius of the Greeks lost itself in criticism, but not that the race to whom we owe the critical spirit did not criticize. You will not ask me to give you a survey of Greek art criticism from Plato to Plotinus. The night is too lovely for that, and the moon, if she heard us, would put more ashes on her face than there are already. But think merely of one perfect little work of aesthetic criticism, Aristotle's treatise on poetry. It is not perfect in form, for it is badly written, consisting perhaps of notes jotted down for an art lecture, or of isolated fragments destined for some larger book, but in temper and treatment it is perfect, absolutely. The ethical effect of art, its importance to culture, and its place in the formation of character, had been done once for all by Plato, but here we have art treated, not from the moral, but from the purely aesthetic point of view. Plato had, of course, dealt with many definitely artistic subjects, such as the importance of unity in a work of art, the necessity for tone and harmony, the aesthetic value of appearances, the relation of the visible arts to the external world, and the relation of fiction to fact. He first perhaps stirred in the soul of man that desire that we have not yet satisfied, the desire to know the connection between beauty and truth, and the place of beauty in the moral and intellectual order of the cosmos. The problems of idealism and realism, as he sets them forth, may seem to many to be somewhat barren of results in the metaphysical sphere of abstract being in which he places them, but transfer them to the sphere of art, and you will find that they are still vital and full of meaning. It may be that it is as a critic of beauty that Plato is destined to live, and that by altering the name of the sphere of his speculation, we shall find a new philosophy. But Aristotle, like Goethe, deals with art primarily in its concrete manifestations, taking tragedy, for instance, and investigating the material it uses, which is language, its subject matter, which is life, the method by which it works, which is action, the conditions under which it reveals itself, which are those of theatric presentation, its logical structure, which is plot, and its final aesthetic appeal, which is to the sense of beauty realized through the passions of pity and awe. That purification and spiritualizing of the nature, which he calls catharsis, is, as Goethe saw, essentially aesthetic, and is not moral, as Lessing fancied. Concerning himself primarily with the impression that the work of art produces, Aristotle sets himself to analyze that impression, to investigate its source, to see how it is engendered. As a physiologist and psychologist, he knows that the health of a function resides in energy. To have a capacity for a passion and not to realize it is to make oneself incomplete and limited. The mimic spectacle of life that tragedy affords cleanses the bosom of much perilous stuff, and by presenting high and worthy objects for the exercise of the emotions, purifies and spiritualizes the man. Nay, not merely does it spiritualize him, but it initiates him also into noble feelings of which he might else have known nothing. The word catharsis having, it has sometimes seemed to me, a definite allusion to the rite of initiation, if indeed that be not, as I am occasionally tempted to fancy, its true and only meaning here. This is of course a mere outline of the book, but you see what a perfect piece of aesthetic criticism it is. Who indeed but a Greek could have analyzed art so well? After reading it, one does not wonder any longer that Alexandria devoted itself so largely to art criticism, and that we find the artistic temperaments of the day investigating every question of style and manner, discussing the great academic schools of painting, for instance, such as the school of Sicyon, that sought to preserve the dignified traditions of the antique mode, or the realistic and impressionist schools that aimed at reproducing actual life, or the elements of ideality in portraiture, or the artistic value of the epic form in an age so modern as theirs, or the proper subject matter for the artist. Indeed, I fear that the inartistic temperaments of the day busied themselves also in matters of literature and art, for the accusations of plagiarism were endless, and such accusations proceed either from the thin, colorless lips of impotence, or from the grotesque mouths of those who, possessing nothing by their own, fancy that they can gain a reputation for wealth by crying out that they have been robbed. And I assure you, my dear Ernest, that the Greeks chattered about painters quite as much as people do nowadays, and had their private views, and shilling exhibitions, and arts and crafts guilds, and pre-Raphaelite movements, and movements towards realism, and lectured about art, and wrote essays on art, and produced their art historians and their archaeologists, and all the rest of it. Why, even the theatrical managers of traveling companies brought their dramatic critics with them when they went on tour, and paid them very handsome salaries for writing laudatory notices. Whatever, in fact, is modern in our life, we owe to the Greeks. Whatever is an anachronism is due to medievalism. It is the Greeks who have given us the whole system of art criticism, and how fine their critical instinct was may be seen from the fact that the material they criticized with most care was, as I have already said, language. For the material that painter or sculptor uses is meager in comparison with that of words. Words have not merely music as sweet as that of viol and lute, color as rich and vivid as any that makes lovely for us the canvas of the Venetian or the Spaniard, and plastic form no less sure and certain than that which reveals itself in marble or in bronze. But thought and passion and spirituality are theirs also, and theirs indeed alone. If the Greeks had criticized nothing but language, they would still have been the great art critics of the world. To know the principles of the highest art is to know the principles of all the arts. But I see that the moon is hiding behind a sulphur-colored cloud. Out of a tawny mane of drift she gleams like a lion's eye. She is afraid that I will talk to you of Lucian and Longinus, of Quintilian and Dionysius, of Pliny and Fronto and Pausanias, of all those who in the antique world wrote or lectured upon art matters. She need not be afraid. I am tired of my expedition into the dim, dull abyss of facts. There is nothing left for me now but the divine momentary pleasure of another cigarette. Cigarettes have at least the charm of leaving one unsatisfied. Ernest, try one of mine. They are rather good. I get them direct from Cairo. The only use of our attachés is that they supply their friends with excellent tobacco. And as the moon has hidden herself, let us talk a little longer. I am quite ready to admit that I was wrong in what I said about the Greeks. They were, as you have pointed out, a nation of art critics. I acknowledge it, and I feel a little sorry for them. For the creative faculty is higher than the critical. There is really no comparison between them. Gilbert. The antithesis between them is entirely arbitrary. Without the critical faculty, there is no artistic creation at all, worthy of the name. You spoke a little while ago of that fine spirit of choice and delicate instinct of selection by which the artist realizes life for us and gives to it a momentary perfection. Well, that spirit of choice, that subtle tact of omission, is really the critical faculty in one of its most characteristic moods, and no one who does not possess this critical faculty can create anything at all in art. Arnold's definition of literature as a criticism of life was not very felicitous in form, but it showed how keenly he recognized the importance of the critical element in all creative work. Ernest. I should have said that great artists worked unconsciously, that they were wiser than they knew, as I think Emerson remarked somewhere. Gilbert. It is really not so, Ernest. All fine imaginative work is self-conscious and deliberate. No poet sings because he must sing. At least, no great poet does. A great poet sings because he chooses to sing. It is so now, and it has always been so. We are sometimes apt to think that the voices that sounded at the dawn of poetry were simpler, fresher, and more natural than ours, and that the world which the early poets looked at, and through which they walked, had a kind of poetical quality of its own, and almost without changing could pass into song. The snow lies thick now upon Olympus, and its steep, scarped sides are bleak and barren, but once we fancy, the white feet of the Muses brushed the dew from the anemones in the morning, and at evening came Apollo to sing to the shepherds in the vale. But in this we are merely lending to other ages what we desire, or think we desire, for our own. Our historical sense is at fault. Every century that produces poetry is, so far, an artificial century, and the work that seems to us to be the most natural and simple product of its time is always the result of the most self-conscious effort. Believe me, Ernest, there is no fine art without self-consciousness, and self-consciousness and the critical spirit are one. Ernest, I see what you mean, and there is much in it. But surely you would admit that the great poems of the early world, the primitive, anonymous, collective poems, were the result of the imagination of races, rather than of the imagination of individuals. Gilbert. Not when they became poetry, not when they received a beautiful form, for there is no art where there is no style, and no style where there is no unity, and unity is of the individual. No doubt Homer had old ballads and stories to deal with, as Shakespeare had chronicles and plays and novels from which to work, but they were merely his rough material. He took them and shaped them into song. They became his, because he made them lovely. They were built of music, and so not built at all, and therefore built forever. The longer one studies life and literature, the more strongly one feels that behind everything that is wonderful stands the individual, and that it is not the moment that makes the man, but the man who creates the age. Indeed, I am inclined to think that each myth and legend that seems to us to spring out of the wonder or terror or fancy of tribe and nation was in its origin the invention of one single mind. The curiously limited number of the myths seems to me to point to this conclusion. But we must not go off into questions of comparative mythology. We must keep to criticism, and what I want to point out is this. An age that has no criticism is either an age in which art is immobile, heretic, and confined to the reproduction of formal types, or an age that possesses no art at all. There have been critical ages that have not been creative in the ordinary sense of the word, ages in which the spirit of man has sought to set in order the treasures of his treasure house, to separate the gold from the silver, and the silver from the lead, to count over the jewels, and to give names to the pearls. But there has never been a creative age that has not been critical also, for it is the critical faculty that invents fresh forms. The tendency of creation is to repeat itself. It is to the critical instinct that we owe each new school that springs up, each new mold that art finds ready to its hand. There is really not a single form that art now uses that does not come to us from the critical spirit of Alexandria, where these forms were either stereotyped or invented or made perfect. I say Alexandria, not merely because it was there that the Greek spirit became most self-conscious, and indeed ultimately expired in skepticism and theology, but because it was to that city, and not to Athens, that Rome turned for her models, and it was through the survival, such as it was, of the Latin language that culture lived at all. When, at the Renaissance, Greek literature dawned upon Europe, the soil had in some measure prepared for it, but, to get rid of the details of history, which are always wearisome and usually inaccurate, let us say generally that the forms of art have been due to the Greek critical spirit. To it we owe the epic, the lyric, the entire drama in every one of its developments, including burlesque, the idyll, the romantic novel, the novel of adventure, the essay, the dialogue, the oration, the lecture, for which perhaps we should not forgive them, and the epigram, in all the wide meaning of that word. In fact, we owe it everything, except the sonnet, to which, however, some curious parallels of thought movement may be traced in the anthology, American Journalism, to which no parallel can be found anywhere, and the ballad, in sham Scotch dialect, which one of our most industrious writers has recently proposed should be made the basis for a final and unanimous effort on the part of our second-rate poets to make themselves really romantic. Each new school, as it appears, cries out against criticism, but it is to the critical faculty in man that it owes its origin. The mere creative instinct does not innovate, but reproduces. Ernest: You have been talking of criticism as an essential part of the creative spirit, and I now fully accept your theory. But what of criticism outside creation? I have a foolish habit of reading periodicals, and it seems to me that most modern criticism is perfectly valueless. Gilbert: So is most modern creative work also. Mediocrity weighing mediocrity in the balance, and incompetence applauding its brother. That is the spectacle which the artistic activity of England affords us from time to time. And yet, I feel I am a little unfair in this matter. As a rule, the critics, I speak of course of the higher class, of those in fact who write for the sixpenny papers, are far more cultured than the people whose work they are called upon to review. This is, indeed, only what one would expect, for criticism demands infinitely more cultivation than creation does. Ernest: Really? Gilbert: Certainly. Anybody can write a 3-volumed novel. It merely requires a complete ignorance of both life and literature. The difficulty that I should fancy the reviewer feels is the difficulty of sustaining any standard. Where there is no style, a standard must be impossible. The poor reviewers are apparently reduced to be the reporters of the police court of literature, the chroniclers of the doings of the habitual criminals of art. It is sometimes said of them that they do not read all through the works they are called upon to criticize. They do not, or at least they should not. If they did so, they would become confirmed misanthropes, or if I may borrow a phrase from one of the pretty Newnham graduates, confirmed womanthropes for the rest of their lives. Nor is it necessary. To know the vintage and quality of a wine, one need not drink the whole cask. It must be perfectly easy in half an hour to say whether a book is worth anything or worth nothing. 10 minutes are really sufficient, if one has the instinct for form. Who wants to wade through a dull volume? One tastes it, and that is quite enough. More than enough, I should imagine. I am aware that there are many honest workers in painting as well as in literature who object to criticism entirely. They are quite right. Their work stands in no intellectual relation to their age. It brings us no new element of pleasure. It suggests no fresh departure of thought or passion or beauty. It should not be spoken of. It should be left to the oblivion that it deserves. Ernest: But my dear fellow, excuse me for interrupting you. You seem to me to be allowing your passion for criticism to lead you a great deal too far, for, after all, even you must admit that it is much more difficult to do a thing than to talk about it. Gilbert: More difficult to do a thing than to talk about it. Not at all. That is a gross popular error. It is very much more difficult to talk about a thing than to do it. In the sphere of actual life, that is of course obvious. Anybody can make history. Only a great man can write it. There is no mode of action, no form of emotion, that we do not share with the lower animals. It is only by language that we rise above them, or above each other. By language, which is the parent, and not the child, of thought. Action, indeed, is always easy, and when presented to us in its most aggravated, because most continuous form, which I take to be that of real industry, becomes simply the refuge of people who have nothing whatsoever to do. No, Ernest, don't talk about action. It is a blind thing dependent on external influences, and moved by an impulse of whose nature it is unconscious. It is a thing incomplete in its essence, because limited by accident and ignorant of its direction, being always at variance with its aim. Its basis is the lack of imagination. It is the last resource of those who do not know how to dream. Ernest, Gilbert, you treat the world as if it were a crystal ball. You hold it in your hand, and reverse it to please a wilful fancy. You do nothing but rewrite history. Gilbert, the one duty we owe to history is to rewrite it. That is not the least of the tasks in store for the critical spirit. When we have fully discovered the scientific laws that govern life, we shall realize that the one person who has more illusions than the dreamer is the man of action. He, indeed, knows neither the origin of his deeds nor their results. From the field in which he thought he had sown thorns, we have gathered our vintage, and the fig tree that he planted for our pleasure is as barren as the thistle, and more bitter. It is because humanity has never known where it was going that it has been able to find its way. Ernest, you think, then, that in the sphere of action a conscious aim is a delusion. Gilbert, it is worse than a delusion. If we lived long enough to see the results of our actions, it may be that those who call themselves good would be sickened with a dull remorse, and those whom the world calls evil stirred by a noble joy. Each little thing that we do passes into the great machine of life, which may grind our virtues to powder and make them worthless, or transform our sins into elements of a new civilization, more marvelous and more splendid than any that has gone before. But men are the slaves of words. They rage against materialism, as they call it, forgetting that there has been no material improvement that has not spiritualized the world, and that there have been few, if any, spiritual awakenings that have not wasted the world's faculties in barren hopes and fruitless aspirations and empty or trammeling creeds. What is termed sin is an essential element of progress. Without it, the world would stagnate or grow old or become colorless. By its curiosity, sin increases the experience of the race. Through its intensified assertion of individualism, it saves us from monotony of type. In its rejection of the current notions about morality, it is one with the higher ethics. And as for the virtues, what are the virtues? Nature, Monsieur Renan tells us, cares little about chastity, and it may be that it is to the shame of the Magdalene, and not to their own purity, that the Lucretias of modern life owe their freedom from stain. Charity, as even those of whose religion it makes a formal part have been compelled to acknowledge, creates a multitude of evils. The mere existence of conscience, that faculty of which people prate so much nowadays, and are so ignorantly proud, is a sign of our imperfect development. It must be merged in instinct before we become fine. Self-denial is simply a method by which man arrests his progress, and self-sacrifice, a survival of the mutilation of the savage, part of that old worship of pain which is so terrible a factor in the history of the world, and which even now makes its victims day by day, and has its altars in the land. Virtues. Who knows what the virtues are? Not you, not I, not anyone. It is well for our vanity that we slay the criminal, for if we suffered him to live, he might show us what we had gained by his crime. It is well for his peace that the saint goes to his martyrdom. He is spared the sight of the horror of his harvest. Ernest, Gilbert, you sound too harsh a note. Let us go back to the more gracious fields of literature. What was it you said? That it was more difficult to talk about a thing than to do it? Gilbert. Yes, I believe I ventured upon that simple truth. Surely you see now that I am right. When man acts, he is a puppet. When he describes, he is a poet. The whole secret lies in that. It was easy enough on the sandy plains by windy Ilion to send the notched arrow from the painted bow, or to hurl against the shield of hide and flame like brass the long ash-handled spear. It was easy for the adulterous queen to spread the Tyrian carpets for her lord, and then, as he lay couched in the marble bath, to throw over his head the purple net, and call to her smooth-faced lover to stab through the meshes at the heart that should have broken at Aulis. For Antigone even, with death waiting for her as her bridegroom, it was easy to pass through the tainted air at noon, and climb the hill, and strew with kindly earth the wretched naked corse that had no tomb. But what of those who wrote about these things? What of those who gave them reality, and made them live forever? Are they not greater than the men and women they sing of? Hector, that sweet knight, is dead, and Lucian tells us how, in the dim underworld, Menipus saw the bleaching skull of Helen, and marveled that it was for so grim a favor that all those horned ships were launched, those beautiful mailed men laid low, those towered cities brought to dust. Yet, every day the swan-like laughter of Leda comes out of the battlements, and looks down at the tide of war. The greybeards wonder at her loveliness, and she stands by the side of the king. In his chamber of stained ivory lies her leman. He is polishing his dainty armor, and combing the scarlet plume. With squire and page, her husband passes from tent to tent. She can see his bright hair, and hears, or fancies that she hears, that clear, cold voice. In the courtyard below, the son of Priam is buckling on his brazen cuirass. The white arms of Andromache are around his neck. He sets his helmet on the ground, lest their babe should be frightened. Behind the embroidered curtains of his pavilion sits Achilles, in perfumed raiment, while in harness of gilt and silver the friend of his soul arrays himself to go forth to the fight. From a curiously carven chest that his mother Thetis had brought to his shipside, the lord of the Myrmidons takes out that mystic chalice that the lip of man had never touched, and cleanses it with brimstone, and with fresh water cools it, and, having washed his hands, fills with black wine its burnished hollow, and spills the thick grape blood upon the ground in honor of him whom at Dodona barefooted prophets worshipped and praised to him, and knows not that he prays in vain, and that by the hands of two knights from Troy, Panthus' son, Euphorbus, whose love-locks were looped with gold, and the Priamid, the lion-hearted, Patroclus, the comrade of comrades, must meet his doom. Phantoms are they? Heroes of mist and mountain? Shadows in a song? No, they are real. Action. What is action? It dies at the moment of its energy. It is a base concession to fact. The world is made by the singer for the dreamer. Ernest. While you talk, it seems to me to be so. Gilbert. It is so in truth. On the moldering citadel of Troy lies the lizard like a thing of green bronze. The owl has built her nest in the palace of Priam. Over the empty plain wander shepherd and goatherd with their flocks, and where, on the wine-surfaced oily sea, wine-dark sea, as Homer calls it, copper-proud and streaked with vermilion, the great galleys of the Danoi came in their gleaming crescent. The lonely tunny fisher sits in his little boat and watches the bobbing corks of his net. Yet every morning the doors of the city are thrown open, and on foot, or in horse-drawn chariot, the warriors go forth to battle, and mock their enemies from behind their iron masks. All day long the fight rages, and when night comes the torches gleam by the tents, and the cresset burns in the hall. Those who live in marble or on painted panel know of life but a single exquisite instant, eternal indeed in its beauty, but limited to one note of passion or one mood of calm. Those whom the poet makes live have their myriad emotions of joy and terror, of courage and despair, of pleasure and of suffering. The seasons come and go in glad or saddening pageant, and with winged or leaden feet the years pass by before them. They have their youth and their manhood, they are children, and they grow old. It is always dawn for St. Helena, as Veronese saw her at the window. Through the still morning air, the angels bring her the symbol of God's pain. The cool breezes of the morning lift the gilt threads from her brow. On that little hill by the city of Florence, where the lovers of Giorgione are lying, it is always the solstice of noon made so languorous by summer suns, that hardly can the slim naked girl dip into the marble tank, the round bubble of clear glass, and the long fingers of the lute player rest idly upon the chords. It is twilight always for the dancing nymphs, whom Corot set free among the silver poplars of France. In eternal twilight they move, those frail diaphanous figures, whose tremulous white feet seem not to touch the dew-drenched grass they tread on. But those who walk in epos, dramas, or romance see through the laboring months the young moons wax and wane, and watch the night from evening unto morning star, and from sunrise unto sunsetting, can note the shifting day with all its gold and shadow. For them, as for us, the flowers bloom and wither, and the earth, that green-tressed goddess as Coleridge calls her, alters her raiment for their pleasure. The statue is concentrated to one moment of perfection. The image stained upon the canvas possesses no spiritual element of growth or change. If they know nothing of death, it is because they know little of life, for the secrets of life and death belong to those, and those only, whom the sequence of time affects, and who possess not merely the present but the future, and can rise or fall from a past of glory or of shame. Movement, that problem of the visible arts, can be truly realized by literature alone. It is literature that shows us the body in its swiftness and the soul in its unrest. Ernest, yes, I see now what you mean, but surely, the higher you place the creative artist, the lower must the critic rank. Gilbert, why so? Ernest, because the best that he can give us will be but an echo of rich music, a dim shadow of clear outlined form. It may indeed be that life is chaos, as you tell me that it is, that its martyrdoms are mean and its heroisms ignoble, and that it is the function of literature to create, from the rough material of actual existence, a new world that will be more marvelous, more enduring, and more true than the world that common eyes look upon, and through which common natures seek to realize their perfection. But surely, if this new world has been made by the spirit and touch of a great artist, it will be a thing so complete and perfect that there will be nothing left for the critic to do. I quite understand now, and indeed admit most readily, that it is far more difficult to talk about a thing than to do it, but it seems to me that this sound and sensible maxim, which is really extremely soothing to one's feelings, and should be adopted as its motto by every academy of literature all over the world, applies only to the relations that exist between art and life, and not to any relations that there may be between art and criticism. Gilbert, but surely, criticism is itself an art, and just as artistic creation implies the working of the critical faculty, and indeed, without it cannot be said to exist at all, so criticism is really creative in the highest sense of the word. Criticism is, in fact, both creative and independent. Ernest, independent. Gilbert, yes, independent. Criticism is no more to be judged by any low standard of imitation or resemblance than is the work of poet or sculptor. The critic occupies the same relation to the work of art that he criticizes as the artist does to the visible world of form and color, or the unseen world of passion and of thought. He does not even require for the perfection of his art the finest materials. Anything will serve his purpose. And just as out of the sordid and sentimental amours of the silly wife of a small country doctor, in the squalid village of Yonville-l'Abbaye, near Rouen, Gustave Flaubert was able to create a classic and make a masterpiece of style, so, from subjects of little or of no importance, such as the pictures of this year's Royal Academy, or in any year's Royal Academy for that matter, Mr. Lewis Morris's poems, Monsieur Honnet's novels, or the plays of Mr. Henry Arthur Jones, the true critic can, if it be his pleasure so to direct or waste his faculty of contemplation, produce work that will be flawless in beauty and instinct with intellectual subtlety. Why not? Dullness is always an irresistible temptation for brilliancy, and stupidity is the permanent Basia Triaphons that calls wisdom from its cave. To an artist so creative as the critic, what does subject matter signify? No more and no less than it does to the novelist and the painter. Like them, he can find his motives everywhere. Treatment is the test. There is nothing that has not in it suggestion or challenge. Ernest, but is criticism really a creative art? Gilbert, why should it not be? It works with materials and puts them into a form that is at once new and delightful. What more can one say of poetry? Indeed, I would call criticism a creation within a creation, for just as the great artists, from Homer and Aeschylus down to Shakespeare and Keats, did not go directly to life for their subject matter, but sought for it in myth and legend and ancient tale, so the critic deals with materials that others have, as it were, purified for him, into which imaginative form and color have already been added. Nay, more, I would say that the highest criticism, being the purest form of personal impression, is in its way more creative than creation, as it has least reference to any standard external to itself, and is, in fact, its own reason for existing, and, as the Greeks would put it, in itself and to itself an end. Certainly, it is never trammeled by any shackles of verisimilitude, no ignoble considerations of probability, that cowardly concession to the tedious repetitions of domestic or public life affect it ever. One may appeal from fiction unto fact, but from the soul there is no appeal. Ernest, from the soul. Gilbert, yes, from the soul. That is what the highest criticism really is, the record of one's own soul. It is more fascinating than history, as it is concerned simply with oneself. It is more delightful than philosophy, as its subject is concrete and not abstract, real and not vague. It is the only civilized form of autobiography, as it deals not with the events, but with the thoughts of one's life, not with life's physical accidents of deed or circumstance, but with the spiritual moods and imaginative passions of the mind. I am always amused by the silly vanity of those writers and artists of our day who seem to imagine that the primary function of the critic is to chatter about their second-rate work. The best that one can say of most modern creative art is that it is just a little less vulgar than reality, and so the critic, with his fine sense of distinction and sure instinct of delicate refinement, will prefer to look into the silver mirror or through the woven veil, and will turn his eyes away from the chaos and clamor of actual existence, though the mirror be tarnished and the veil be torn. His sole aim is to chronicle his own impressions. It is for him that pictures are painted, books written, and marble hewn into form. Ernest, I seem to have heard another theory of criticism. Gilbert, yes, it has been said by one whose gracious memory we all revere, and the music of whose pipe once lured Proserpina from her Sicilian fields, and made those white feet stir, and not in vain, the Cumnor cowslips, that the proper aim of criticism is to see the object as in itself it really is. But this is a very serious error, and takes no cognizance of criticism's most perfect form, which is in its essence purely subjective, and seeks to reveal its own secret and not the secret of another. For the highest criticism deals with art not as expressive, but as impressive purely. Ernest, but is that really so? Gilbert, of course it is. Who cares whether Mr. Ruskin's views on Turner are sound or not? What does it matter? That mighty and majestic prose of his, so fervid and so fiery colored in its noble eloquence, so rich in its elaborate symphonic music, so sure and certain, at its best, in subtle choice of word and epithet, is at least as great a work of art as any of those wonderful sunsets that bleach or rot on their corrupted canvases in England's gallery. Greater indeed, one is apt to think at times, not merely because its equal beauty is more enduring, but on account of the fuller variety of its appeal, soul speaking to soul in those long cadenced lines, not through form and color alone, though through these indeed, completely and without loss, but with intellectual and emotional utterance, with lofty passion and with loftier thought, with imaginative insight and with poetic aim. Greater, I always think, even as literature is the greater art. Who again cares whether Mr. Pater has put into the portrait of Mona Lisa something that Leonardo never dreamed of? The painter may have been merely the slave of an archaic smile, as some have fancied, but whenever I pass into the cool galleries of the Palace of the Louvre, and stand before that strange figure set in its marble chair, in that cirque of fantastic rocks, as in some faint light under sea, I murmur to myself, she is older than the rocks among which she sits. Like the vampire, she has been dead many times, and learned the secrets of the grave, and has been a diver in deep seas, and keeps their fallen day about her, and trafficked for strange webs with Eastern merchants, and as Leda was the mother of Helen of Troy, and as St. Anne, the mother of Mary. And all this has been to her but as the sound of lyres and flutes, and lives only in the delicacy with which it has molded the changing lineaments, and tinged the eyelids and the hands. And I say to my friend, the presence that thus so strangely rose beside the waters is expressive of what in the ways of 1,000 years man has come to desire. And he answers me, hers is the head upon which all the ends of the world are come, and the eyelids are a little weary. And so the picture becomes more wonderful to us than it really is, and reveals to us a secret of which, in truth, it knows nothing. And the music of the mystical prose is as sweet in our ears as was that flute player's music, that lend to the lips of La Gioconda those subtle and poisonous curves. Do you ask me what Leonardo would have said had anyone told him of this picture, that all the thoughts and experience of the world had etched and molded there, in that which they had of power to refine and make expressive the outward form, the animalism of Greece, the lust of Rome, the reverie of the Middle Age with its spiritual ambition and imaginative loves, the return of the pagan world, the sins of the Borgias? He would probably have answered that he had contemplated none of these things, but had concerned himself simply with certain arrangements of lines and masses, and with new and curious color harmonies of blue and green. And it is for this very reason that the criticism which I have quoted is criticism of the highest kind. It treats the work of art simply as a starting point for a new creation. It does not confine itself, let us at least suppose so for the moment, to discovering the real intention of the artist and accepting that as final. And in this it is right, for the meaning of any beautiful created thing is, at least, as much in the soul of him who looks at it as it was in his soul who wrought it. Nay, it is rather the beholder who lends to the beautiful thing its myriad meanings, and makes it marvelous for us, and sets it in some new relation to the age, so that it becomes a vital portion of our lives, and a symbol of what we pray for, or perhaps of what, having prayed for, we fear that we may receive. The longer I study Ernest, the more clearly I see that the beauty of the visible arts is, as the beauty of music, impressive primarily, and that it may be marred, and indeed often is so, by any excess of intellectual intention on the part of the artist. For when the work is finished it has, as it were, an independent life of its own, and may deliver a message far other than that which was put into its lips to say. Sometimes, when I listen to the overture to Tannhauser, I seem indeed to see that comely knight treading delicately on the flower-strewn grass, and to hear the voice of Venus calling to him from the caverned hill. But at other times, it speaks to me of 1,000 different things, of myself, it may be, and my own life, or of the lives of others whom one has loved and grown weary of loving, or of the passions that man has known, or of the passions that man has not known, and so has sought for. Tonight it may fill one with that love of the impossible, that amour de l'impossible, which falls like a madness on many who think they live securely and out of reach of harm, so that they sicken suddenly with the poison of unlimited desire, and, in the infinite pursuit of what they may not obtain, grow faint and swoon or stumble. Tomorrow, like the music of which Aristotle and Plato tell us, the noble Dorian music of the Greek, it may perform the office of a physician, and give us an andogene against pain, and heal the spirit that is wounded, and bring the soul into harmony with all right things. And what is true about music is true about all the arts. Beauty has as many meanings as man has moods. Beauty is the symbol of symbols. Beauty reveals everything because it expresses nothing. When it shows us itself, it shows us the whole fiery-colored world. Ernest: But is such work as you have talked about really criticism? Gilbert: It is the highest criticism, for it criticizes not merely the individual work of art, but beauty itself, and fills with wonder a form which the artist may have left void, or not understood, or understood incompletely. Ernest: The highest criticism, then, is more creative than creation, and the primary aim of the critic is to see the object as in itself it really is not. That is your theory, I believe. Gilbert: Yes, that is my theory. To the critic, the work of art is simply a suggestion for a new work of his own that need not necessarily bear any obvious resemblance to the thing it criticizes. The one characteristic of a beautiful form is that one can put into it whatever one wishes, and see in it whatever one chooses to see. And the beauty that gives to creation its universal and aesthetic element makes the critic a creator in his turn, and whispers of 1,000 different things which were not present in the mind of him who carved the statue or painted the panel or graved the gem. It is sometimes said by those who understand neither the nature of the highest criticism nor the charm of the highest art that the pictures that the critic loves most to write about are those that belong to the anecdotage of painting, and that deal with scenes taken out of literature or history. But this is not so. Indeed, pictures of this kind are far too intelligible. As a class, they rank with illustrations, and even considered from this point of view are failures, as they do not stir the imagination, but set definite bounds to it. For the domain of the painter is, as I suggested before, widely different from that of the poet. To the latter belongs life in its full and absolute entirety, not merely the beauty that men look at, but the beauty that men listen to also, not merely the momentary grace of form or the transient gladness of color, but the whole sphere of feeling, the perfect cycle of thought. The painter is so far limited that it is only through the mask of the body that he can show us the mystery of the soul, only through conventional images that he can handle ideas, only through its physical equivalents that he can deal with psychology. And how inadequately does he do it then, asking us to accept the torn turban of the Moor for the noble rage of Othello, or a dotard in a storm for the wild madness of Lear. Yet it seems as if nothing could stop him. Most of our elderly English painters spend their wicked and wasted lives in poaching upon the domain of the poets, marring their motives by clumsy treatment, and striving to render, by visible form or color, the marvel of what is invisible, the splendor of what is not seen. Their pictures are, as a natural consequence, insufferably tedious. They have degraded the invisible arts into the obvious arts, and the one thing not worth looking at is the obvious. I do not say that poet and painter may not treat of the same subject. They have always done so, and will always do so. But while the poet can be pictorial or not, as he chooses, the painter must be pictorial always. For a painter is limited, not to what he sees in nature, but to what upon canvas may be seen. And so, my dear Ernest, pictures of this kind will not really fascinate the critic. He will turn from them to such works as make him brood and dream and fancy, to works that possess the subtle quality of suggestion, and seem to tell one that even from them there is an escape into a wider world. It is sometimes said that the tragedy of an artist's life is that he cannot realize his ideal. But the true tragedy that dogs the steps of most artists is that they realize their ideal too absolutely. For, when the ideal is realized, it is robbed of its wonder and its mystery, and becomes simply a new starting point for an ideal that is other than itself. This is the reason why music is the perfect type of art. Music can never reveal its ultimate secret. This also is the explanation of the value of limitations in art. The sculptor gladly surrenders imitative color, and the painter the actual dimensions of form, because by such renunciations they are able to avoid too definite a presentation of the real, which would be mere imitation, and too definite a realization of the ideal, which would be too purely intellectual. It is through its very incompleteness that art becomes complete in beauty, and so addresses itself not to the faculty of recognition nor to the faculty of reason, but to the aesthetic sense alone, which, while accepting both reason and recognition as stages of apprehension, subordinates them both to a pure synthetic impression of the work of art as a whole, and, taking whatever alien emotional elements the work may possess, uses their very complexity as a means by which a richer unity may be added to the ultimate impression itself. You see, then, how it is that the aesthetic critic rejects those obvious modes of art that have but one message to deliver, and having delivered it become dumb and sterile, and seeks rather for such modes as suggest reverie and mood, and by their imaginative beauty make all interpretations true, and no interpretation final. Some resemblance, no doubt, the creative work of the critic will have to the work that has stirred him to creation, but it will be such resemblance as exists, not between nature and the mirror that the painter of landscape or figure may be supposed to hold up to her, but between nature and the work of the decorative artist. Just as on the flowerless carpets of Persia, tulip and rose blossom indeed and are lovely to look on, though they are not reproduced in visible shape or line, just as the pearl and purple of the seashell is echoed in the church of St. Martin at Venice, just as the vaulted ceiling of the wondrous chapel at Ravenna is made gorgeous by the gold and green and sapphire of the peacock's tail, though the birds of Juno fly not across it, so the critic reproduces the work that he criticizes in a mode that is never imitative, and part of whose charm may really consist in the rejection of resemblance, and shows us in this way not merely the meaning but also the mystery of beauty, and, by transforming each art into literature, solves once and for all the problem of art's unity. But I see it is time for supper. After we have discussed some Chambertin and a few ortolans, we will pass on to the question of the critic considered in the light of the interpreter. Ernest: you admit, then, that the critic may occasionally be allowed to see the object as in itself it really is. Gilbert: I am not quite sure. Perhaps I may admit it after supper. There is a subtle influence in supper. A dialogue, part 2. Persons, the same. Scene, the same. Ernest: The ortolans were delightful, and the Chartembin perfect, and now let us return to the point at issue. Gilbert: don't let us do that. Conversation should touch everything, but should concentrate itself on nothing. Let us talk about moral indignation, its cause and cure, a subject on which I think of writing, or about the survival of Thersites, as shown by the English comic papers, or about any topic that may turn up. Ernest: No, I want to discuss the critic and criticism. You have told me that the highest criticism deals with art, not as expressive, but as impressive purely, and is consequently both creative and independent, is in fact an art by itself, occupying the same relation to creative work that creative work does to the visible world of form and color, or the unseen world of passion and of thought. Well, now tell me, will not the critic be sometimes a real interpreter? Gilbert: Yes, the critic will be an interpreter, if he chooses. He can pass from his synthetic impression of the work of art as a whole to an analysis or exposition of the work of art itself, and in this lower sphere, as I hold it to be, there are many delightful things to be said and done. Yet his object will not always be to explain the work of art. He may seek rather to deepen its mystery, to raise round it, and round its maker, that mist of wonder which is dear to both gods and worshippers alike. Ordinary people are terribly at ease in Zion. They propose to walk arm in arm with the poets, and have a glib, ignorant way of saying, "Why would we read what is written about Shakespeare and Milton? We can read the plays and the poems. That is enough." But an appreciation of Milton is, As the late rector of Lincoln remarked once, the reward of consummate scholarship. And he who desires to understand Shakespeare truly must understand the relations in which Shakespeare stood to the Renaissance and the Reformation, to the age of Elizabeth and the age of James. He must be familiar with the history of the struggle for supremacy between the old classical forms and the new spirit of romance, between the school of Sidney and Daniel and Johnson, and the school of Marlowe and Marlowe's greater son. He must know the materials that were at Shakespeare's disposal, and the method in which he used them, and the conditions of theatric presentation in the 16th, 1500s, and 17th, 1600s century, their limitations and their opportunities for freedom, and the literary criticism of Shakespeare's day, its aims and modes and canons. He must study the English language in its progress, and blank or rhymed verse in its various developments. He must study the Greek drama, and the connection between the art of the creator of the Agamemnon and the art of the creator of Macbeth. In a word, he must be able to bind Elizabethan London to the Athens of Pericles, and to learn Shakespeare's true position in the history of European drama and the drama of the world. The critic will certainly be an interpreter, but he will not treat art as a riddling sphinx, whose shallow secret may be guessed and revealed by one whose feet are wounded and who knows not his name. Rather, he will look upon art as a goddess, whose mystery it is his province to intensify, and whose majesty his privilege to make more marvelous in the eyes of men. And here, Ernest, this strange thing happens. The critic will indeed be an interpreter, but he will not be an interpreter in the sense of one who simply repeats, in another form, a message that has been put into his lips to say. For, just as it is only by contact with the art of foreign nations that the art of a country gains that individual and separate life that we call nationality, so, by curious inversion, it is only by intensifying his own personality that the critic can interpret the personality and work of others. And the more strongly this personality enters into the interpretation, the more real the interpretation becomes, the more satisfying, the more convincing, and the more true. Ernest, I would have said that personality would have been a disturbing element. Gilbert, no, it is an element of revelation. If you wish to understand others, you must intensify your own individualism. Ernest, what then is the result? Gilbert, I will tell you, and perhaps I can tell you best by definite example. It seems to me that, while the literary critic stands of course first, as having the wider range and larger vision and nobler material, each of the arts has a critic, as it were, assigned to it. The actor is a critic of the drama. He shows the poet's work under new conditions and by a method special to himself. He takes the written word and action, gesture and voice become the media of revelation. The singer or the player on lute and viol is the critic of music. The etcher of a picture robs the painting of its fair colors, but shows us by the use of a new material its true color quality, its tones and values, and the relations of its masses, and so is, in his way, a critic of it. For the critic is he who exhibits to us a work of art in a form different from that of the work itself, and the employment of a new material is a critical as well as a creative element. Sculpture, too, has its critic, who may be either the carver of a gem, as he was in Greek days, or some painter like Mantegna, who sought to reproduce on canvas the beauty of plastic line and the symphonic dignity of processional bas-relief. And in the case of all these creative critics of art, it is evident that personality is an absolute essential for any real interpretation. When Rubinstein plays to us the Sonata Appassionata of Beethoven, he gives us not merely Beethoven, but also himself, and so gives us Beethoven absolutely, Beethoven reinterpreted through a rich artistic nature and made vivid and wonderful to us by a new and intense personality. When a great actor plays Shakespeare, we have the same experience. His own individuality becomes a vital part of the interpretation. People sometimes say that actors give us their own Hamlets and not Shakespeare's, And this fallacy, for it is a fallacy, is, I regret to say, repeated by that charming and graceful writer who has lately deserted the turmoil of literature for the peace of the House of Commons, I mean the author of Obiter Dicta. In point of fact, there is no such thing as Shakespeare's Hamlet. If Hamlet has something of the definiteness of a work of art, he has also all the obscurity that belongs to life. There are as many Hamlets as there are melancholies. Ernest, as many Hamlets as there are melancholies. Gilbert, yes. And as art springs from personality, so it is only to personality that it can be revealed, and from the meeting of the two comes right interpretive criticism. Ernest, the critic then, considered as the interpreter, will give no less than he receives, and lend as much as he borrows. Gilbert, he will be always showing us the work of art in some new relation to our age. He will always be reminding us that great works of art are living things, are in fact the only things that live. So much indeed will he feel this, that I am certain that, as civilization progresses and we become more highly organized, the elect spirits of each age, the critical and cultured spirits, will grow less and less interested in actual life, and will seek to gain their impressions almost entirely from what art has touched. For life is terribly deficient in form. Its catastrophes happen in the wrong way and to the wrong people. There is a grotesque horror about its comedies, and its tragedies seem to culminate in farce. One is always wounded when one approaches it. Things last either too long or not long enough. Ernest, poor life, poor human life. Are you not even touched by the tears that the Roman poet tells us are part of its essence? Gilbert, too quickly touched by them, I fear. For when one looks back upon the life that was so vivid in its emotional intensity, and filled with such fervent moments of ecstasy or of joy, it all seems to be a dream and an illusion. What are the unreal things but the passions that once burned one like fire? What are the incredible things but the things that one has faithfully believed? What are the improbable things, the things that one has done oneself? No, Ernest, life cheats us with shadows, like a puppet master. We ask it for pleasure. It gives it to us, with bitterness and disappointment in its train. We come across some noble grief that we think will lend the purple dignity of tragedy to our days, but it passes away from us, and things less noble take its place. And on some gray, windy dawn, or odorous eve of silence and of silver, we find ourselves looking with callous wonder, or dull heart of stone, at the tress of gold-flecked hair that we had once so wildly worshipped and so madly kissed. Ernest, life then is a failure. Gilbert, from the artistic point of view, certainly. And the chief thing that makes life a failure from this artistic point of view is the thing that lends to life its sordid security, the fact that one can never repeat exactly the same emotion. How different it is in the world of art. On a shelf of the bookcase behind you stands the Divine Comedy, and I know that, if I open it at a certain place, I shall be filled with a fierce hatred of someone who has never wronged me, or stirred by a great love for someone whom I shall never see. There is no mood or passion that art cannot give us, and those of us who have discovered her secret can settle beforehand what our experiences are going to be. We can choose our day and select our hour. We can say to ourselves, tomorrow at dawn, we shall walk with grave Virgil through the valley of the shadow of death, and lo, the dawn finds us in the obscure wood, and the Mantuan stands by our side. We pass through the gate of the legend fatal to hope, and with pity or with joy behold the horror of another world. The hypocrites go by with their painted faces and their cowls of gilded lead. Out of the ceaseless winds that drive them, the carnal look at us, and we watch the heretic rending his flesh, and the glutton lashed by the rain. We break the withered branches from the tree in the grove of the harpies, and each dull-hued poisonous twig bleeds with red blood before us, and cries aloud with bitter cries. Out of a horn of fire Odysseus speaks to us, and when from his sepulchre of flame the great Gehenna rises, The pride that triumphs over the torture of that bed becomes ours for a moment. Through the dim purple air fly those who have stained the world with the beauty of their sin, and in the pit of loathsome disease, dropsy-stricken and swollen of body into the semblance of a monstrous lute, lies Adamo de Brescia, the coiner of false coin. He bids us listen to his misery. We stop, and with dry and gaping lips, he tells us how he dreams day and night of the brooks of clear water that in cool dewy channels gush down the green Castantine hills. Sinon, the false Greek of Troy, mocks at him. He smites him in the face, and they wrangle. We are fascinated by their shame and loiter, till Virgil chides us and leads us away to that city turreted by giants where great Nimrod blows his horn. Terrible things are in store for us, and we go to meet them in Dante's raiment and with Dante's heart. We traverse the marshes of the Styx, and the Argenti swims to the boat through the slimy waves. He calls to us, and we reject him. When we hear the voice of his agony, we are glad, and Virgil praises us for the bitterness of our scorn. We tread upon the cold crystal of Cocytus, in which traitors stick like straws in glass. Our foot strikes against the head of Bocca. He will not tell us his name, and we tear the hair in handfuls from the screaming skull. Albertigo prays us to break the ice upon his face, that he may weep a little. We pledge our word to him, and when he has uttered his dolorous tale, we deny the word that we have spoken, and pass from him. Such cruelty being courtesy indeed, for who more base than he who has mercy for the condemned of God? In the jaws of Lucifer, we see the man who sold Christ, and in the jaws of Lucifer, the men who slew Caesar. We tremble, and come forth to re-behold the stars. In the land of purgation, the air is freer, and the holy mountain rises into the pure light of day. There is peace for us, and for those who for a season abide in it, there is some peace also, though, pale from the poison of the Maremma, Madonna Pia passes before us, and Ismene, with the sorrow of earth still lingering about her, is there. Soul after soul makes us share in some repentance or some joy. He whom the mourning of his widow taught to drink the sweet wormwood of pain tells us of Nella praying in her lonely bed, and we learn from the mouth of Bioconte how a single tear may save a dying sinner from the fiend. Sordello, that noble and disdainful Lombard, eyes us from afar like a couchant lion. When he learns that Virgil is one of Mantua's citizens, he falls upon his neck, and when he learns that he is the singer of Rome, he falls before his feet. In that valley whose grass and flowers are fairer than cleft emerald and Indian wood, and brighter than scarlet and silver, they are singing who in the world were kings, but the lips of Rudolph of Habsburg do not move to the music of the others, and Philip of France beats his breast, and Henry of England sits alone. On and on we go, climbing the marvelous stair, and the stars become larger than their wont, and the song of the kings grows faint, and at length we reach the 7 trees of gold and the garden of the earthly paradise. In a griffin-drawn chariot appears one whose brows are bound with olive, who is veiled in white, and mantled in green, and robed in a vesture that is colored like live fire. The ancient flame wakes within us. Our blood quickens through terrible pulses. We recognize her. It is Beatrice, the woman we have worshipped. The ice congealed about our heart melts. Wild tears of anguish break from us, and we bow our forehead to the ground, for we know that we have sinned. When we have done penance, and are purified, and have drunk from the fountain of Lethe, and bathed in the fountain of Uno, the mistress of our soul raises us to the paradise of heaven. Out of that eternal pearl, the moon, the face of Picarda Dantati leans to us. Her beauty troubles us for a moment, and when, like a thing that falls through water, she passes away, we gaze after her with wistful eyes. The sweet planet of Venus is full of lovers. Cuniza, the sister of Eslin, the lady of Sordello's heart, is there, and Folco, the passionate singer of Provence, who in sorrow for azaleas forsook the world, and the Canaanitish harlot whose soul was the first that Christ redeemed. Joachim of Flora stands in the sun, and in the sun, Aquinas recounts the story of St. Francis, and Bonaventure the story of St. Dominic. Through the burning rubies of Mars, Cacciaguida approaches. He tells us of the arrow that is shot from the bow of exile, and how salty tastes the bread of another, and how steep are the stairs in the house of a stranger. In Saturn the soul sings not, and even she who guides us dare not smile. On a ladder of gold the flames rise and fall. At last, we see the pageant of the mystical rose. Beatrice fixes her eyes upon the face of God, to turn them not again. The beatific vision is granted to us. We know the love that moves the sun and all the stars. Yes, we can put the earth back 600 courses and make ourselves one with the great Florentine, kneel at the same altar with him, and share his rapture and his scorn. And if we grow tired of an antique time, and desire to realize our own age, in all its weariness and sin, are there not books that can make us live more in one single hour than life can make us live in a score of shameful years? Close to your hand lies a little volume, bound in some Nile green skin that has been powdered with gilded nenufars and smoothed with hard ivory. It is the book that Gautier loved. It is Baudelaire's masterpiece. Open it at that sad madrigal that begins, Qui m'importe que tu sois sage, sois belle et sois triste, and you will find yourself worshipping sorrow as you have never worshipped joy. Pass on to the poem of the man who tortures himself. Let its subtle music steal into your brain and color your thoughts, and you will become for a moment what he was who wrote it, nay, not for a moment only, but for many barren moonlit nights and sunless sterile days. Will a despair that is not your own make its dwelling within you, and the misery of another gnaw your heart away? Read the whole book, suffer it to tell even one of its secrets to your soul, and your soul will grow eager to know more, and will feed upon poisonous honey, and seek to repent of strange crimes of which it is guiltless, and to make atonement for terrible pleasures that it has never known. And then, when you are tired of these flowers of evil, turn to the flowers that grow in the garden of Perdita, and in their dew-drenched chalices cool your fevered brow, and let their loveliness heal and restore your soul. Or wake from his forgotten tomb the sweet Syrian Meleager, and bid the lover of Heliodor make you music, for he too has flowers in his song, red pomegranate blossoms, and irises that smell of myrrh, ringed daffodils and dark blue hyacinths, and marjoram and crinkled ox eyes. Dear to him was the perfume of the bean field that evening, and dear to him the odorous eared spikenard that grew on the Syrian hills, and the fresh green thyme, the wine cup's charm. The feet of his love as she walked in the garden were like lilies set upon lilies. Softer than sleep-laden poppy petals were her lips, softer than violets and as scented. The flame-like crocus sprang from the grass to look at her. For her the slim narcissus stored the cool rain, and for her the anemones forgot the Sicilian winds that wooed them, and neither crocus, nor anemone, nor narcissus was as fair as she was. It is a strange thing, this transference of emotion. We sicken with the same maladies as the poets, and the singer lends us his pain. Dead lips have their message for us, and hearts that have fallen to dust can communicate their joy. We run to kiss the bleeding mouth of Fantine, and we follow Manon Lescaut over the whole world. Ours is the love madness of the Tyrian, and the terror of Orestes is ours also. There is no passion that we cannot feel, no pleasure that we may not gratify, and we can choose the time of our initiation and the time of our freedom also. Life. Don't let us go to life for our fulfillment or our experience. It is a thing narrowed by circumstances, incoherent in its utterance, and without that fine correspondence of form and spirit, which is the only thing that can satisfy the artistic and critical temperament. It makes us pay too high a price for its wares, and we purchase the meanest of its secrets at a cost that is monstrous and infinite. Ernest, Must we go then to art for everything? Gilbert, for everything, because art does not hurt us. The tears that we shed at a play are a type of the exquisite sterile emotions that is the function of art to awaken. We weep, but we are not wounded. We grieve, but our grief is not bitter. In the actual life of man, sorrow, as Spinoza says somewhere, is a passage to a lesser perfection. But the sorrow with which art fills us both purifies and initiates. If I may quote once more from the great art critic of the Greeks, it is through art, and through art only, that we can realize our perfection. Through art, and through art only, that we can shield ourselves from the sordid perils of actual existence. This results not merely from the fact that nothing that one can imagine is worth doing, and that one can imagine everything, but from the subtle law that emotional forces, like the forces of the physical sphere, are limited in extent and energy. One can feel so much, and no more. And how can it matter with what pleasure life tries to tempt one, or with what pain it seeks to maim and mar one's soul, if, in the spectacle of the lives of those who have never existed, one has found the true secret of joy, and wept away one's tears over their deaths who, like Cordelia and the daughter of Brabantio, can never die? Ernest, stop a moment. It seems to me that in everything you have said there is something radically immoral. Gilbert, all art is immoral. Ernest, all art. Gilbert, yes. For emotion for the sake of emotion is the aim of art, and emotion for the sake of action is the aim of life, and of that practical organization of life that we call society. Society, which is the beginning and basis of morals, exists simply for the concentration of human energy, and in order to ensure its own continuance and healthy stability, it demands, and no doubt rightly demands, of each of its citizens that he should contribute some form of productive labor to the common weal, and toils and travail that the day's work may be done. Society often forgives the criminal. It never forgives the dreamer. The beautiful sterile emotions that art excites in us are hateful in its eyes, and so completely are people dominated by the tyranny of this dreadful social ideal that they are always coming shamelessly up to one at private views and other places that are open to the general public, and saying in a loud stentorian voice, "What are you doing?" whereas, "What are you thinking?" is the only question that any single civilized being should ever be allowed to whisper to another. They mean well, no doubt, these honest beaming folk. Perhaps that is the reason why they are so excessively tedious. But someone should teach them that while, in the opinion of society, contemplation is the gravest sin of which any citizen can be guilty, in the opinion of the highest culture, it is the proper occupation of man. Ernest, contemplation. Gilbert, contemplation. I said to you some time ago that it was far more difficult to talk about a thing than to do it. Let me say to you now that to do nothing at all is the most difficult thing in the world, the most difficult and the most intellectual. To Plato, with his passion for wisdom, this was the noblest form of energy. To Aristotle, with his passion for knowledge, this was the noblest form of energy also. It was to this that the passion for holiness led the saint and the mystic of medieval days. Ernest, we exist then to do nothing. Gilbert, it is to do nothing that the elect exist. Action is limited and relative. Unlimited and absolute is the vision of him who sits at ease and watches, who walks in loneliness and dreams. But we who are born at the close of this wonderful age are at once too cultured and too critical, too intellectually subtle and too curious of exquisite pleasures, to accept any speculations about life in exchange for life itself. To us the Città Divina is colorless, and the Fruitio Dei without meaning. Metaphysics do not satisfy our temperaments, and religious ecstasy is out of date. The world through which the academic philosopher becomes the spectator of all time and of all existence is not really an ideal world, but simply a world of abstract ideas. When we enter it, we starve amidst the chill mathematics of thought. The courts of the city of God are not open to us now. Its gates are guarded by ignorance, and to pass them we have to surrender all that in our nature is most divine. It is enough that our fathers believed. They have exhausted the faith faculty of the species. Their legacy to us is the skepticism of which they were afraid. Had they put it into words, it might not live within us as thought. No, Ernest, no. We cannot go back to the saint. There is far more to be learned from the sinner. We cannot go back to the philosopher, and the mystic leads us astray, who, as Mr. Pater suggests somewhere, would exchange the curve of a single rose leaf for that formless intangible being which Plato rates so high. What to us is the illumination of Philo, the abyss of Eckhart, the vision of Brohim, the monstrous heaven itself that was revealed to Swedenborg's blinded eyes? Such things are less than the yellow trumpet of one daffodil of the field, far less than the meanest of the visible arts. For, just as nature is matter struggling into mind, so art is mind expressing itself under the conditions of matter, and thus, even in the lowliest of her manifestations, she speaks to both sense and soul alike. To the aesthetic temperament, the vague is always repellent. The Greeks were a nation of artists, because they were spared the sense of the infinite. Like Aristotle, like Goethe after he had read Kant, we desire the concrete, and nothing but the concrete can satisfy us. Ernest, what then do you propose? Gilbert, it seems to me that with the development of the critical spirit, we shall be able to realize not merely our own lives, but the collective life of the race, and so to make ourselves absolutely modern, in the true meaning of the word modernity. For he to whom the present is the only thing that is present knows nothing of the age in which he lives. To realize the 19th century, one must realize every century that has preceded it and that has contributed to its making. To know anything about oneself, one must know all about others. There must be no mood with which one cannot sympathize, no dead mode of life that one cannot make alive. Is this impossible? I think not. By revealing to us the absolute mechanism of all action, and so freeing us from the self-imposed and trammeling burden of moral responsibility. The scientific principle of heredity has become, as it were, the warrant for the contemplative life. It has shown us that we are never less free than when we try to act. It has hemmed us round with the nets of the hunter, and written upon the wall the prophecy of our doom. We may not watch it, for it is within us. We may not see it, save in a mirror that mirrors the soul. It is Nemesis without her mask. It is the last of the fates, and the most terrible. It is the only one of the gods whose real name we know. And yet, while in the sphere of practical and external life, it has robbed energy of its freedom and activity of its choice, in the subjective sphere, where the soul is at work, it comes to us, this terrible shadow, with many gifts in its hands, gifts of strange temperaments and subtle susceptibilities, gifts of wild ardors and chill moods of indifference, complex multiform gifts of thoughts that are at variance with each other, and passions that war against themselves. And so, it is not our own life that we live, but the lives of the dead, and the soul that dwells within us is no single spiritual entity, making us personal and individual, created for our service, and entering into us for our joy. It is something that has dwelt in fearful places, and in ancient sepulchres has made its abode. It is sick with many maladies, and has memories of curious sins. It is wiser than we are, and its wisdom is bitter. It fills us with impossible desires, and makes us follow what we know we cannot gain. One thing, however, Ernest, it can do for us. It can lead us away from surroundings whose beauty is dimmed to us by the mist of familiarity, or whose ignoble ugliness and sordid claims are marring the perfection of our development. It can help us to leave the age in which we were born, and to pass into other ages, and find ourselves not exiled from their air. It can teach us how to escape from our experience, and to realize the experiences of those who are greater than we are. The pain of Leopardi crying out against life becomes our pain. Theocritus blows on his pipe, and we laugh with the lips of nymph and shepherd. In the wolfskin of Pierre Vidal we flee before the hounds, and in the armor of Lancelot we ride from the bower of the queen. We have whispered the secret of our love beneath the cowl of Abelard, and in the stained raiment of Villon have put our shame into song. We can see the dawn through Shelley's eyes, and when we wander the Endymion, the moon grows amorous of our youth. Ours is the anguish of Atyrs, and ours the weak rage and noble sorrows of the Dane. Do you think that it is the imagination that enables us to live these countless lives? Yes, it is the imagination, and the imagination is the result of heredity. It is simply concentrated race experience. Ernest: but where in this is the function of the critical spirit? Gilbert: the culture that this transmission of racial experiences makes possible can be made perfect by the critical spirit alone, and indeed may be said to be one with it. For who is the true critic but he who bears within himself the dreams, the ideas, and feelings of myriad generations, and to whom no form of thought is alien, no emotional impulse obscure? And who the true man of culture, if not he who by fine scholarship and fastidious rejection has made instinct self-conscious and intelligent, and can separate the work that has distinction from the work that has it not, and so by contact and comparison makes himself master of the secrets of style and school, and understands their meanings, and listens to their voices, and develops that spirit of disinterested curiosity, which is the real root, as it is the real flower, of the intellectual life, and thus attains to intellectual clarity, and, having learned the best that is known and thought in the world, lives, it is not fanciful to say so, with those who are the immortals. Yes, Ernest, the contemplative life, the life that has for its aim not doing, but being, and not being merely, but becoming, that is what the critical spirit can give us. The gods live thus, either brooding over their own perfection, as Aristotle tells us, or, as Epicurus fancied, watching with the calm eyes of the spectator the tragic comedy of the world that they have made. We, too, might live like them, and set ourselves to witness with appropriate emotions the varied scenes that man and nature afford. We might make ourselves spiritual by detaching ourselves from action, and become perfect by the rejection of energy. It has often seemed to me that Browning felt something of this. Shakespeare hurls Hamlet into active life, and makes him realize his mission by effort. Browning might have given us a Hamlet who would have realized his mission by thought. Incident and event were to him unreal or unmeaning. He made the soul the protagonist of life's tragedy, and looked on action as the one undramatic element of a play. To us, at any rate, the contemplative life is the true ideal. From the high tower of thought, we can look out at the world. Calm and self-centered and complete, the aesthetic critic contemplates life, and no arrow drawn at a venture can pierce between the joints of his harness. He at least is safe. He has discovered how to live. Is such a mode of life immoral? Yes, all the arts are immoral, except those baser forms of sensual or didactic art that seek to excite to action of evil or of good. For action of every kind belongs to the sphere of ethics. The aim of art is simply to create a mood. Is such a mode of life unpractical? Ah, it is not so easy to be unpractical as the ignorant Philistine imagines. It were well for England if it were so. There is no country in the world so much in need of unpractical people as this country of ours. With us, thought is degraded by its constant association with practice. Who that moves in the stress and turmoil of actual existence, noisy politician, or brawling social reformer, or poor narrow-minded priest blinded by the sufferings of that unimportant section of the community among whom he has cast his lot, can seriously claim to be able to form a disinterested intellectual judgment about any one thing? Each of the professions means a prejudice. The necessity for a career forces everyone to take sides. We live in the age of the overworked and the undereducated, the age in which people are so industrious that they become absolutely stupid. And, harsh though it may sound, I cannot help saying that such people deserve their doom. The sure way of knowing nothing about life is to try to make oneself useful. Ernest: a charming doctrine, Gilbert. Gilbert: I am not sure about that, but it has at least the minor merit of being true. That the desire to do good to others produces a plentiful crop of prigs is the least of the evils of which it is the cause. The prig is a very interesting psychological study, and though of all poses, a moral pose is the most offensive, still to have a pose at all is something. It is a formal recognition of the importance of treating life from a definite and reasoned standpoint. That humanitarian sympathy wars against nature, by securing the survival of the failure, may make the man of science loathe its facile virtues. The political economist may cry out against it for putting the improvident on the same level as the provident, and so robbing life of the strongest, because most sordid, incentive to industry. But, in the eyes of the thinker, the real harm that emotional sympathy does is that it limits knowledge, and so prevents us from solving any single social problem. We are trying at present to stave off the coming crisis, the coming revolution, as my friends the Fabianists call it, by means of doles and alms. Well, when the revolution or crisis arrives, we shall be powerless, because we shall know nothing. And so, Ernest, let us not be deceived. England will never be civilized till she has added utopia to her dominions. There is more than one of her colonies that she might with advantage surrender for so fair a land. What we want are unpractical people who see beyond the moment and think beyond the day. Those who try to lead the people can only do so by following the mob. It is through the voice of one crying out in the wilderness that the ways of the gods must be prepared. But perhaps you think that in beholding for the mere joy of beholding, and contemplating for the sake of contemplation, there is something that is egotistic. If you think so, do not say so. It takes a thoroughly selfish age, like our own, to deify self-sacrifice. It takes a thoroughly grasping age, such as that in which we live, to set above the fine intellectual virtues those shallow and emotional virtues that are an immediate practical benefit to itself. They miss their aim too, these philanthropists and sentimentalists of our day, who are always chattering to one about one's duty to one's neighbor. For the development of the race depends on the development of the individual, and where self-culture has ceased to be the ideal, the intellectual standard is instantly lowered, and often, ultimately lost. If you meet at dinner a man who has spent his life in educating himself, a rare type in our time, I admit, but still one occasionally to be met with, you rise from table richer, and conscious that a high ideal has for a moment touched and sanctified your days. But oh, my dear Ernest, to sit next a man who has spent his life in trying to educate others. What a dreadful experience that is. How appalling is that ignorance which is the inevitable result of the fatal habit of imparting opinions. How limited in range the creature's mind proves to be. How it wearies us, and must weary himself, with its endless repetitions and sickly reiteration. How lacking it is in any element of intellectual growth. In what a vicious circle it always moves. Ernest, you speak with strange feeling, Gilbert. Have you had this dreadful experience, as you call it, lately? Gilbert, few of us escape it. People say that the schoolmaster is abroad. I wish to goodness he were. But the type of which, after all, he is only one, and certainly the least important, of the representatives, seems to me to be really dominating our lives. And just as the philanthropist is the nuisance of the ethical sphere, so the nuisance of the intellectual sphere is the man who is so occupied in trying to educate others that he has never had any time to educate himself. No, Ernest, self-culture is the true ideal of man. Goethe saw it, and the immediate debt that we owe to Goethe is greater than the debt we owe to any man since Greek days. The Greeks saw it, and have left us, as their legacy to modern thought, the conception of the contemplative life, as well as the critical method by which alone can that life be truly realized. It was the one thing that made the Renaissance great and gave us humanism. It is the one thing that could make our own age great also. For the real weakness of England lies, not in incomplete armaments or unfortified coasts, not in the poverty that creeps through sunless lanes, or in the drunkenness that brawls in loathsome courts, but simply in the fact that her ideals are emotional and not intellectual. I do not deny that the intellectual ideal is difficult of attainment, still less that it is, and perhaps will be for years to come, unpopular with the crowd. It is so easy for people to have sympathy with suffering. It is so difficult for them to have sympathy with thought. Indeed, so little do ordinary people understand what thought really is, that they seem to imagine that, when they have said that a theory is dangerous, they have pronounced its condemnation, whereas it is only such theories that have any true intellectual value. An idea that is not dangerous is unworthy of being called an idea at all. Ernest: Gilbert, you bewilder me. You have told me that all art is, in its essence, immoral. Are you going to tell me now that all thought is, in its essence, dangerous? Gilbert: Yes, in the practical sphere it is so. The security of society lies in custom and unconscious instinct, and the basis of the stability of society as a healthy organism is the complete absence of any intelligence amongst its members. The great majority of people, being fully aware of this, rank themselves naturally on the side of that splendid system that elevates them to the dignity of machines, and rage so wildly against the intrusion of the intellectual faculty into any question that concerns life, that one is tempted to define man as a rational animal who always loses his temper when he is called upon to act in accordance with the dictates of reason. But let us turn from the practical sphere, and say no more about the wicked philanthropists who, indeed, may well be left to the mercy of the almond-eyed sage of the Yellow River, Shang Tzu the wise, who has proved that such well-meaning and offensive busybodies have destroyed the simple and spontaneous virtue that there is in man. They are a wearisome topic, and I am anxious to get back to the sphere in which criticism is free. Ernest: The sphere of the intellect. Gilbert: Yes. You remember that I spoke of the critic as being in his own way as creative as the artist, whose work indeed may be merely of value insofar as it gives to the critic a suggestion for some new mood of thought and feeling which he can realize with equal, or perhaps greater, distinction of form, and, through the use of a fresh medium of expression, make differently beautiful and more perfect. Well, you seemed to be a little skeptical about the theory, but perhaps I wronged you? Ernest: I am not really skeptical about it, but I must admit that I feel very strongly that such work as you describe the critic producing, and creative such work must undoubtedly be admitted to be, is, of necessity, purely subjective, whereas the greatest work is objective always, objective and impersonal. Gilbert: The difference between objective and subjective work is one of external form merely. It is accidental, not essential. All artistic creation is absolutely subjective. The very landscape that Corot looked at was, as he said himself, but a mood of his own mind, and those great figures of Greek or English drama that seem to us to possess an actual existence of their own, apart from the poets who shaped and fashioned them, are, in their ultimate analysis, simply the poets themselves, not as they thought they were, but as they thought they were not, and by such thinking came in strange manner, though but for a moment, really so to be. For out of ourselves we can never pass, nor can there be in creation what in the Creator was not. Nay, I would say that the more objective a creation appears to be, the more subjective it really is. Shakespeare might have met Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in the white streets of London, or seen the serving men of rival houses bite their thumbs at each other in the open square, but Hamlet came out of his soul, and Romeo out of his passion. They were elements of his nature to which he gave visible form, impulses that stirred so strongly within him that he had, as it were perforce, to suffer them to realize their energy, not on the lower plane of actual life, where they would have been trammeled and constrained and so made imperfect, but on that imaginative plane of art, where love can indeed find in death its rich fulfillment, where one can stab the eavesdropper behind the arras, and wrestle in a new-made grave, and make a guilty king drink his own hurt, and see one's father's spirit beneath the glimpses of the moon, stalking in complete steel from misty wall to wall. Action being limited would have left Shakespeare unsatisfied and unexpressed, And, just as it is because he did nothing that he has been able to achieve everything, so it is because he never speaks to us of himself in his plays that his plays reveal him to us absolutely, and show us his true nature and temperament far more completely than do those strange and exquisite sonnets, even in which he bears to crystal eyes the secret closet of his heart. Yes, the objective form is the most subjective in matter. Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask, and he will tell you the truth. Ernest, the critic then, being limited to the subjective form, will necessarily be less fully able to express himself than the artist, who has always at his disposal the forms that are impersonal and objective. Gilbert, not necessarily, and certainly not at all if he recognizes that each mode of criticism is, in its highest development, simply a mood, and that we are never more true to ourselves than when we are inconsistent. The aesthetic critic, constant only to the principle of beauty in all things, will ever be looking for fresh impressions, winning from the various schools the secret of their charm, bowing, it may be, before foreign altars, or smiling, if it be his fancy, at strange new gods. What other people call one's past has, no doubt, everything to do with them, but has absolutely nothing to do with oneself. The man who regards his past is a man who deserves to have no future to look forward to. When one has found expression for a mood, one has done with it. You laugh, but believe me, it is so. Yesterday it was realism that charmed one. One gained from it that nouveau frisson which it was its aim to produce. One analyzed it, explained it, and wearied of it. At sunset came the luministe in painting, and the symboliste in poetry, in the spirit of medievalism, that spirit which belongs not to time but to temperament, woke suddenly in wounded Russia, and stirred us for a moment by the terrible fascination of pain. Today the cry is for romance, and already the leaves are tremulous in the valley, and on the purple hilltops walks beauty with slim gilded feet. The old modes of creation linger, of course. The artists reproduce either themselves or each other with wearisome iteration. But criticism is always moving on, and the critic is always developing. Nor, again, is the critic really limited to the subjective form of expression. The method of the drama is his, as well as the method of the epos. He may use dialogue, as he did who set Milton talking to Marvell on the nature of comedy and tragedy, and made Sidney and Lord Brooke discourse on letters beneath the Penshurst oaks, or adopt narration, as Mr. Pater is fond of doing, each of whose imaginary portraits, is not that the title of the book, presents to us, under the fanciful guise of fiction, some fine and exquisite piece of criticism, one on the painter Watteau, another on the philosophy of Spinoza, a third on the pagan elements of the early Renaissance, and the last, and in some respects the most suggestive, on the source of that Aufklärung, that enlightening which dawned on Germany in the last century, and to which our own culture owes so great a debt. Dialogue, certainly, that wonderful literary form which, from Plato to Lucian, and from Lucian to Giordani Bruno, and from Bruno to that grand old pagan in whom Carlyle took such delight, the creative critics of the world have always employed, can never lose for the thinker its attraction as a mode of expression. By its means he can both reveal and conceal himself, and give form to every fancy, and reality to every mood. By its means he can exhibit the object from each point of view, and show it to us in the round, as a sculpture shows us things, gaining in this matter all the richness and reality of effect that comes from those side issues that are suddenly suggested by the central idea in its progress, and really illumine the idea more completely, or from those felicitous afterthoughts that give a fuller completeness to the central scheme, and yet convey something of the delicate charm of chance. Ernest, by its means, too, he can invent an imaginary antagonist, and convert him when he chooses, by some absurdly sophistical argument. Gilbert, it is so easy to convert others. It is so difficult to convert oneself. To arrive at what one really believes, one must speak through lips different from one's own. To know the truth, one must imagine myriads of falsehoods. For what is truth? In matters of religion, it is simply the opinion that has survived. In matters of science, it is the ultimate sensation. In matters of art, it is one's last mood. And you see now, Ernest, that the critic has at his disposal as many objective forms of expression as the artist has. Ruskin put his criticism into imaginative prose and is superb in his changes and contradictions, and Browning put his into blank verse and made painter and poet yield us their secret, and Monsieur Renan uses dialogue, and Mr. Pater fiction, and Rossetti translated into sonnet music the color of Giorgione and the design of Ingres, and his own design and color also, feeling, with the instinct of one who had many modes of utterance, that the ultimate art is literature, and the finest and fullest medium that of words. Ernest, well, now that you have settled that the critic has at his disposal all objective forms, I wish you would tell me what are the qualities that should characterize the true critic. Gilbert, what would you say they were? Ernest, well, I should say that a critic should above all things be fair. Gilbert, not fair. A critic cannot be fair in the ordinary sense of the word. It is only about things that do not interest one that one can give a really unbiased opinion, which is no doubt the reason why an unbiased opinion is always absolutely valueless. The man who sees both sides of a question is a man who sees absolutely nothing at all. Art is a passion, and, in matters of art, thought is inevitably colored by emotion, and so is fluid rather than fixed, and, depending upon fine moods and exquisite moments, cannot be narrowed into the rigidity of a scientific formula or a theological dogma. It is to the soul that art speaks, and the soul may be made the prisoner of the mind as well as of the body. One should, of course, have no prejudices, but, as a great Frenchman remarked 100 years ago, it is one's business in such matters to have preferences, and when one has preferences, one ceases to be fair. It is only an auctioneer who can equally and impartially admire all schools of art. No, fairness is not one of the qualities of the true critic. It is not even a condition of criticism. Each form of art within which we come in contact dominates us for the moment to the exclusion of every other form. We must surrender ourselves absolutely to the work in question, whatever it may be, if we wish to gain its secret. For the time, we must think of nothing else, can think of nothing else indeed. Ernest, the true critic will be rational at any rate, will he not? Gilbert, rational. There are two ways of disliking art, Ernest. One is to dislike it, the other to like it rationally. For art, as Plato saw, and not without regret, creates in listener and spectator a form of divine madness. It does not spring from inspiration, but it makes others inspired. Reason is not the faculty to which it appeals. If one loves art at all, one must love it beyond all other things in the world, and against such love, the reason, if one listened to it, would cry out. There is nothing sane about the worship of beauty. It is too splendid to be sane. Those of whose lives it forms the dominant note will always seem to the world to be pure visionaries. Ernest, well, at least, the critic will be sincere. Gilbert, a little sincerity is a dangerous thing, and a great deal of it is absolutely fatal. The true critic will indeed always be sincere in his devotion to the principle of beauty, but he will seek for beauty in every age and in each school, and will never suffer himself to be limited to any settled custom of thought or stereotyped mode of looking at things. He will realize himself in many forms and by 1,000 different ways, and will ever be curious of new sensations and fresh points of view. Through constant change, and through constant change alone, he will find his true unity. He will not consent to be the slave of his own opinions, for what is mind but motion in the intellectual sphere? The essence of thought and the essence of life is growth. You must not be frightened by words, Ernest. What people call insincerity is simply a method by which we can multiply our personalities. Ernest, I am afraid I have not been fortunate in my suggestions. Gilbert, of the 3 qualifications you mentioned, 2, sincerity and fairness, were, if not actually moral, at least on the borderland of morals. and the first condition of criticism is that the critic should be able to recognize that the sphere of art and the sphere of ethics are absolutely distinct and separate. When they are confused, chaos has come again. They are too often confused in England now, and though our modern Puritans cannot destroy a beautiful thing, yet, by means of their extraordinary prurience, they can almost taint beauty for a moment. It is chiefly, I regret to say, through journalism that such people find expression. I regret it, because there is much to be said in favor of modern journalism. By giving us the opinions of the uneducated, it keeps us in touch with the ignorance of the community. By carefully chronicling the current events of contemporary life, it shows us what very little importance such events really are. By invariably discussing the unnecessary, it makes us understand what things are requisite for culture and what are not. But it should not allow poor Tartuffe to write articles upon modern art. When it does this, it stultifies itself. And yet Tartuffe's articles and Chadband's notes do this good, at least. They serve to show how extremely limited is the area over which ethics and ethical considerations can claim to exercise influence. Science is out of the reach of morals, for her eyes are fixed upon eternal truths. Art is out of the reach of morals, for her eyes are fixed upon things beautiful and immortal and ever-changing. To morals belong the lower and less intellectual spheres. However, let these mouthing Puritans pass. They have their comic side. Who can help laughing when an ordinary journalist seriously proposes to limit the subject matter at the disposal of the artist? Some limitation might well, and will soon, I hope, be placed upon some of our newspapers and newspaper writers, for they give us the bald, sordid, disgusting facts of life. They chronicle, with degrading avidity, the sins of the second-rate, and with the conscientiousness of the illiterate, give us accurate and prosaic details of the doings of people of absolutely no interest whatsoever. But the artist, who accepts the facts of life, and yet transforms them into shapes of beauty, and makes them vehicles of pity or of awe, and shows their color element, and their wonder, and their true ethical import also, and builds out of them a world more real than reality itself, and of loftier and more noble import, who shall set limits to him? Not the apostles of that new journalism, which is but the old vulgarity writ large. Not the apostles of that new Puritanism, which is but the wine of the hypocrite, and is both writ and spoken badly. The mere suggestion is ridiculous. Let us leave these wicked people, and proceed to the discussion of the artistic qualifications necessary for the true critic. Ernest: and what are they? Tell me yourself. Gilbert: temperament is the primary requisite for the critic, a temperament exquisitely susceptible to beauty, and to the various impressions that beauty gives us. Under what conditions, and by what means, this temperament is engendered in race or individual, we will not discuss at present. It is sufficient to note that it exists, and that there is in us a beauty sense, separate from the other senses and above them, separate from the reason and of nobler import, separate from the soul and of equal value, a sense that leads some to create, and others, the finer spirits, as I think, to contemplate merely. But to be purified and made perfect, this sense requires some form of exquisite environment. Without this it starves, or is dulled. You remember that lovely passage in which Plato describes how a young Greek should be educated, and with what insistence he dwells upon the importance of surroundings, telling us how the lad is to be brought up in the midst of fair sights and sounds, so that the beauty of material things may prepare his soul for the reception of the beauty that is spiritual. Insensibly, and without knowing the reason why, he is to develop that real love of beauty which, as Plato is never weary of reminding us, is the true aim of education. By slow degrees, there is to be engendered in him such a temperament as will lead him naturally and simply to choose the good in preference to the bad, and, rejecting what is vulgar and discordant, to follow by fine instinctive taste all that possesses grace and charm and loveliness. Ultimately, in its due course, this taste is to become critical and self-conscious, but at first it is to exist purely as a cultivated instinct, and he who has received this true culture of the inner man will with clear and certain vision perceive the omissions and faults in art or nature, and with a taste that cannot err, while he praises and finds his pleasure in what is good, and receives it into his soul, and so becomes good and noble. He will rightly blame and hate the bad, now in the days of his youth, even before he is able to know the reason why. And so when, later on, the critical and self-conscious spirit develops in him, he will recognize and salute it as a friend with whom his education has made him long familiar. I need hardly say, Ernest, how far we in England have fallen short of this ideal, and I can imagine the smile that would illuminate the glossy face of the Philistine if one ventured to suggest to him that the true aim of education was the love of beauty, and that the methods by which education should work were the development of temperament, the cultivation of taste, and the creation of the critical spirit. Yet, even for us, there is left some loveliness in environment, and the dullness of tutors and professors matters very little when one can loiter in the grey cloisters at Magdalen, and listen to some flute-like voice singing in Waynfleet's chapel, or lie in the green meadow among the strange snake-spotted fritillaries, and watch the sunburnt noon smite to a finer gold the tower's gilded veins, or wander up the Christchurch staircase beneath the vaulted ceiling's shadowy fans, or pass through the sculptured gateway of Laud's building in the College of St. John. Nor is it merely at Oxford or Cambridge that the sense of beauty can be formed and trained and perfected. All over England, there is a renaissance of the decorative arts. Ugliness has had its day. Even in the houses of the rich there is taste, and the houses of those who are not rich have been made gracious and comely and sweet to live in. Caliban, poor noisy Caliban, thinks that when he has ceased to make mows at a thing, the thing ceased to exist. But if he mocks no longer, it is because he has been met with mockery, swifter and keener than his own, and for a moment has been bitterly schooled into that silence which should seal forever his uncouth, distorted lips. What has been done up to now has been chiefly in the clearing of the way. It is always more difficult to destroy than it is to create, and when what one has to destroy is vulgarity and stupidity, the task of destruction needs not merely courage, but also contempt. Yet it seems to me to have been, in a measure, done. We have got rid of what was bad. We have now to make what is beautiful. And though the mission of the aesthetic movement is to lure people to contemplate, not to lead them to create, yet, as the creative instinct is strong in the Celt, and it is the Celt who leads in art, there is no reason why, in future years, this strange renaissance should not become almost as mighty in its way as was that new birth of art that woke many centuries ago in the cities of Italy. Certainly, for the cultivation of temperament, we must turn to the decorative arts, to the arts that touch us, not to the arts that teach us. Modern pictures are, no doubt, delightful to look at least some of them are, but they are quite impossible to live with. They are too clever, too assertive, too intellectual. Their meaning is too obvious, and their method too clearly defined. One exhausts what they have to say in a very short time, and then they become as tedious as one's relations. I am very fond of the work of many of the impressionist painters of Paris and London. Subtlety and distinction have not yet left the school. Some of their arrangements and harmonies serve to remind one of the unapproachable beauty of Gautier's immortal Symphonie en blanc measure, that flawless masterpiece of color and music, which may have suggested the type as well as the titles of many of their best pictures. For a class that welcomes the incompetent with sympathetic eagerness, and that confuses the bizarre with the beautiful, and vulgarity with truth, they are extremely accomplished. They can do etchings that have the brilliancy of epigrams, pastels that are as fascinating as paradoxes, and as for their portraits, whatever the commonplace may say against them, no one can deny that they possess that unique and wonderful charm which belongs to works of pure fiction. But even the Impressionists, earnest and industrious as they are, will not do. I like them. Their white keynote, with its variations in lilac, was an era in color. Though the moment does not make the man, the moment certainly makes the impressionist, and for the moment in art, And for the moment's monument, as Rossetti phrased it, what may not be said? They are suggestive also. If they have not opened the eyes of the blind, they have at least given great encouragement to the short-sighted, and while their leaders may have all the inexperience of old age, their young men are far too wise to be ever sensible. Yet they will insist on treating painting as if it were a mode of autobiography invented for the use of the illiterate, and they are always prating to us on their coarse, gritty canvases of their unnecessary selves and their unnecessary opinions, and spoiling by a vulgar overemphasis that fine contempt of nature, which is the best and only modest thing about them. One tires, at the end, of the work of individuals whose individuality is always noisy and generally uninteresting. There is far more to be said in favor of that newer school at Paris, the archaicistes, as they call themselves, who, refusing to leave the artist entirely at the mercy of the weather, do not find the ideal of art in mere atmospheric effect, but seek rather for the imaginative beauty of design and the loveliness of fair color, and rejecting the tedious realism of those who merely paint what they see, try to see something worth seeing, and to see it not merely with actual and physical vision, but with that nobler vision of the soul, which is as far wider in spiritual scope as it is far more splendid in artistic purpose. They, at any rate, work under those decorative conditions that each art requires for its perfection, and have sufficient aesthetic instinct to regret those sordid and stupid limitations of absolute modernity of form which have proved the ruin of so many of the Impressionists. Still, the art that is frankly decorative is the art to live with. It is, of all our visible arts, the one art that creates in us both mood and temperament. Mere color, unspoiled by meaning, and unallied with definite form, can speak to the soul in 1,000 different ways. The harmony that resides in the delicate proportions of lines and masses becomes mirrored in the mind. The repetitions of pattern give us rest. The marvels of design stir the imagination. In the mere loveliness of the materials employed, there are latent elements of culture. Nor is this all. By its deliberate rejection of nature as the ideal of beauty, as well as the imitative method of the ordinary painter, decorative art not merely prepares the soul for the reception of true imaginative work, but develops in it that sense of form which is the basis of creative, no less than critical achievement. For the real artist is he who proceeds, not from feeling to form, but from form to thought and passion. He does not first conceive an idea, and then say to himself, I will put my idea into a complex meter of 14 lines, but, realizing the beauty of the sonnet scheme, he conceives certain modes of music and methods of rhyme, and the mere form suggests what is to fill it and make it intellectually and emotionally complete. From time to time, the world cries out against some charming artistic poet, because, to use its hackneyed and silly phrase, he has nothing to say. But if he had something to say, he would probably say it, and the result would be tedious. It is just because he has no new message that he can do beautiful work. He gains his inspiration from form, and from form purely, as an artist should. A real passion would ruin him. Whatever actually occurs is spoiled for art. All bad poetry springs from genuine feeling. To be natural is to be obvious, and to be obvious is to be inartistic. Ernest, I wonder, do you really believe what you say? Gilbert, why should you wonder? It is not merely in art that the body is the soul. In every sphere of life, form is the beginning of things. The rhythmic, harmonious gestures of dancing convey, Plato tells us, both rhythm and harmony into the mind. Forms are the food of faith, cried Newman in one of those great moments of sincerity that make us admire and know the man. He was right, though he may not have known how terribly right he was. The creeds are believed, not because they are rational, but because they are repeated. Yes, form is everything. It is the secret of life. Find expression for a sorrow, and it will become dear to you. Find expression for a joy, and you intensify its ecstasy. Do you wish to love? Use love's litany, and the words will create the yearning from which the world fancies that they spring. Have you a grief that corrodes your heart? Steep yourself in the language of grief, learn its utterance from Prince Hamlet and Queen Constance, and you will find that mere expression is a mode of consolation, and that form, which is the birth of passion, is also the death of pain. And so, to return to the sphere of art, it is form that creates not merely the critical temperament, but also the aesthetic instinct, that unerring instinct that reveals to one all things under their conditions of beauty. Start with the worship of form, and there is no secret in art that will not be revealed to you, and remember that in criticism, as in creation, temperament is everything, and that it is, not by the time of their production, but by the temperaments to which they appeal, that the schools of art should be historically grouped. Ernest, your theory of education is delightful, but what influence will your critic, brought up in these exquisite surroundings, possess? Do you really think that any artist is ever affected by criticism? Gilbert, the influence of the critic will be the mere fact of his own existence. He will represent the flawless type. In him, the culture of the century will see itself realized. You must not ask of him to have any aim other than the perfecting of himself. The demand of the intellect, as has been well said, is simply to feel itself alive. The critic may, indeed, desire to exercise influence, but, if so, he will concern himself not with the individual, but with the age, which he will seek to wake into consciousness and to make responsive, creating in it new desires and appetites, and lending it his larger vision and his nobler moods. The actual art of today will occupy him less than the art of tomorrow, far less than the art of yesterday, and as for this or that person at present toiling away, what do the industrious matter? They do their best, no doubt, and consequently we get the worst from them. It is always with the best intentions that the worst work is done. And besides, my dear Ernest, when a man reaches the age of 40, or becomes a royal academician, or is elected a member of the Athenaeum Club, or is recognized as a popular novelist, whose books are in great demand at suburban railway stations, one may have the amusement of exposing him, but one cannot have the pleasure of reforming him. And this is, I dare say, very fortunate for him, for I have no doubt that reformation is a much more painful process than punishment, is indeed punishment in its most aggravated and moral form, a form which accounts for our entire failure as a community to reclaim that interesting phenomenon who is called the confirmed criminal. Ernest, but may it not be that the poet is the best judge of poetry, and the painter of painting? Each art must appeal primarily to the artist who works in it. His judgments will surely be the most valuable. Gilbert, the appeal of all art is simply to the artistic temperament. Art does not address herself to the specialist. Her claim is that she is universal, and that in all her manifestations she is one. Indeed, so far from its being true that the artist is the best judge of art, a really great artist can never judge of other people's work at all, and can hardly, in fact, judge of his own. That very concentration of vision that makes a man an artist limits by its sheer intensity his faculty of fine appreciation. The energy of creation hurries him blindly on to his own goal. The wheels of his chariot raise the dust as a cloud around him. The gods are hidden from each other. They can recognize their worshippers. That is all. Ernest, you say that a great artist cannot recognize the beauty of work different from his own. Gilbert, it is impossible for him to do so. Wordsworth saw in Endymion merely a pretty piece of paganism, and Shelley, with his dislike of actuality, was deaf to Wordsworth's message, being repelled by its form, and Byron, that great, passionate, human, incomplete creature, could appreciate neither the poet of the cloud nor the poet of the lake, and the wonder of Keats was hidden from him. The realism of Euripides was hateful to Sophocles. Those droppings of warm tears had no music for him. Milton, with his sense of the grand style, could not understand the method of Shakespeare any more than could Sir Joshua the method of Gainsborough. Bad artists always admire each other's work. They call it being large-minded and free from prejudice, but a truly great artist cannot conceive of life being shown or beauty fashioned under any conditions other than those that he has selected. Creation employs all its critical faculty within its own sphere. It may not use it in the sphere that belongs to others. It is exactly because a man cannot do a thing that he is the proper judge of it. Ernest: do you really mean that? Gilbert: yes, for creation limits, while contemplation widens, the vision. Ernest: but what about technique? Surely each art has its separate technique. Gilbert: certainly. Each art has its grammar and its materials. There is no mystery about either, and the incompetent can always be correct. But, while the laws upon which art rests may be fixed and certain, to find their true realization, they must be touched by the imagination into such beauty that they will seem an exception, each one of them. Technique is really personality. This is the reason why the artist cannot teach it, why the pupil cannot learn it, and why the aesthetic critic can understand it. To the great poet, there is only one method of music, his own. To the great painter, there is only one manner of painting, that which he himself employs. The aesthetic critic, and the aesthetic critic alone, can appreciate all forms and modes. It is to him that art makes her appeal. Ernest: well, I think I have put all my questions to you, and now I must admit. Gilbert: don't say that you agree with me. When people agree with me, I always feel that I must be wrong. Ernest: in that case, I certainly won't tell you whether I agree with you or not, but I will put another question. You have explained to me that criticism is a creative art. What future has it? Gilbert: it is to criticism that the future belongs. The subject matter at the disposal of creation becomes every day more limited in extent and variety. Providence and Mr. Walter Besant have exhausted the obvious. If creation is to last at all, it can only do so on the condition of becoming far more critical than it is at present. The old roads and dusty highways have been traversed too often. Their charm has been worn away by plodding feet, and they have lost that element of novelty or surprise which is so essential for romance. He who would stir us now by fiction must either give us an entirely new background or reveal to us the soul of man in its innermost workings. The first is for the moment being done for us by Mr. Rudyard Kipling. As one turns over the pages of his Plain Tales from the Hills, one feels as if one were seated under a palm tree, reading life by superb flashes of vulgarity. The bright colors of the bazaars dazzle one's eyes. The jaded, second-rate Anglo-Indians are in exquisite incongruity with their surroundings. The mere lack of style in the storyteller gives an odd journalistic realism to what he tells us. From the point of view of literature, Mr. Kipling is a genius who drops his aspirates. From the point of view of life, he is a reporter who knows vulgarity better than anyone has ever known it. Dickens knew its close and its comedy. Mr. Kipling knows its essence and its seriousness. He is our first authority on the second rate, and has seen marvelous things through keyholes, and his backgrounds are real works of art. As for the second condition, we have had Browning, and Meredith is with us. But there is still much to be done in the sphere of introspection. People sometimes say that fiction is getting too morbid. As far as psychology is concerned, it has never been morbid enough. We have merely touched the surface of the soul, that is all. In one single ivory cell of the brain, there are stored away things more marvelous and more terrible than even they have dreamed of, who, like the author of Le Rouge et le Noir, have sought to track the soul into its most secret places, and to make life confess its dearest sins. Still, there is a limit even to the number of untried backgrounds, and it is possible that a further development of the habit of introspection may prove fatal to the creative faculty to which it seeks to supply fresh material. I myself am inclined to think that creation is doomed. It springs from too primitive, too natural an impulse. However this may be, it is certain that the subject matter at the disposal of creation is always diminishing, while the subject matter of criticism increases daily. There are always new attitudes for the mind, and new points of view. The duty of imposing form upon chaos does not grow less as the world advances. There was never a time when criticism was more needed than it is now. It is only by its means that humanity can become conscious of the point at which it has arrived. Hours ago, Ernest, you asked me the use of criticism. You might just as well have asked me the use of thought. It is criticism, as Arnold points out, that creates the intellectual atmosphere of the age. It is criticism, as I hope to point out myself someday, that makes the mind a fine instrument. We, in our educational system, have burdened the memory with a load of unconnected facts and laboriously striven to impart our laboriously acquired knowledge. We teach people how to remember. We never teach them how to grow. It has never occurred to us to try and develop in the mind a more subtle quality of apprehension and discernment. The Greeks did this, and when we come in contact with the Greek critical intellect, we cannot but be conscious that, while our subject matter is in every respect larger and more varied than theirs is the only method by which this subject matter can be interpreted. England has done one thing. It has invented and established public opinion, which is an attempt to organize the ignorance of the community and to elevate it to the dignity of physical force. But wisdom has always been hidden from it. Considered as an instrument of thought, the English mind is coarse and undeveloped. The only thing that can purify it is the growth of the critical instinct. It is criticism, again, that, by concentration, makes culture possible. It takes the cumbersome mass of creative work and distills it into a finer essence. Who that desires to retain any sense of form could struggle through the monstrous, multitudinous books that the world has produced, books in which thought stammers or ignorance brawls. The thread that is to guide us across the wearisome labyrinth is in the hands of criticism. Nay more, where there is no record, and history is either lost or was never written, criticism can rewrite the past for us from the very smallest fragment of language or art, just as surely as the man of science can from some tiny bone, or the mere impress of a foot upon a rock, recreate for us the winged dragon or Titan lizard that once made the earth shake beneath its tread, can call Behemoth out of his cave, and make Leviathan swim once more across the startled sea. Prehistoric history belongs to the philological and archaeological critic. It is to him that the origins of things are revealed. The self-conscious deposits of an age are nearly always misleading. Through philological criticism alone, we know more of the centuries of which no actual record has been preserved than we do of the centuries that have left us their scrolls. It can do for us what can be done neither by physics nor metaphysics. It can give us the exact science of mind in the process of becoming. It can do for us what history cannot do. It can tell us what man thought before he learned how to write. You have asked me about the influence of criticism. I think I have answered that question already, but there is also this to be said. It is criticism that makes us cosmopolitan. The Manchester School tried to make men realize the brotherhood of humanity by pointing out the commercial advantages of peace. It sought to degrade the wonderful world into a common marketplace for the buyer and the seller. It addressed itself to the lowest instincts, and it failed. War followed upon war, and the tradesman's creed did not prevent France and Germany from clashing together in blood-stained battle. There are others of our own day who seek to appeal to mere emotional sympathies, or to the shallow dogmas of some vague system of abstract ethics. They have their peace societies, so dear to the sentimentalists, and their proposals for unarmed international arbitration, so popular among those who have never read history. But mere emotional sympathy will not do. It is too variable and too closely connected with the passions, and a board of arbitrators who, for the general welfare of the race, are to be deprived of the power of putting their decisions into execution will not be of much avail. There is only one thing worse than injustice, and that is justice without her sword in her hand. When right is not might, it is evil. No, the emotions will not make us cosmopolitan, any more than the greed for gain could do so. It is only by the cultivation of the habit of intellectual criticism that we shall be able to rise superior to race prejudices. Goethe, you will not misunderstand what I say, was a German of the Germans. He loved his country, no man more so. Its people were dear to him, and he led them. Yet, when the iron hoof of Napoleon trampled upon vineyard and cornfield, his lips were silent. "How can one write songs of hatred without hating?" he said to Eckermann, "and how could I, to whom culture and barbarism are alone of importance, hate a nation which is among the most cultivated of the earth, and to which I owe so great a part of my own cultivation?" This note, sounded in the modern world by Goethe first, will become, I think, the starting point for the cosmopolitanism of the future. Criticism will annihilate race prejudices by insisting upon the unity of the human mind in the variety of its forms. If we are tempted to make war upon another nation, we shall remember that we are seeking to destroy an element of our own culture, and possibly its most important element. As long as war is regarded as wicked, it will always have its fascination. When it is looked upon as vulgar, it will cease to be popular. The change will of course be slow, and people will not be conscious of it. They will not say, "We will not war against France because her prose is perfect," but because the prose of France is perfect, they will not hate the land. Intellectual criticism will bind Europe together, in bonds far closer than those that can be forged by shopman or sentimentalist. It will give us the peace that springs from understanding. Nor is this all. It is criticism that, recognizing no position as final, and refusing to bind itself by the shallow shibboleths of any sect or school, creates that serene philosophic temper which loves truth for its own sake, and loves it not the less because it knows it to be unattainable. How little we have of this temper in England, and how much we need it. The English mind is always in a rage. The intellect of the race is wasted in the sordid and stupid quarrels of second-rate politicians or third-rate theologians. It was reserved for a man of science to show us the supreme example of that sweet reasonableness of which Arnold spoke so wisely, and alas, to so little effect. The author of The Origin of Species had, at any rate, the philosophic temper. If one contemplates the ordinary pulpits and platforms of England, one can but feel the contempt of Julian or the indifference of Montaigne. We are dominated by the fanatic, whose worst vice is his sincerity. Anything approaching to the free play of the mind is practically unknown amongst us. People cry out against the sinner, yet it is not the sinful, but the stupid, who are our shame. There is no sin except stupidity. Ernest, what an antinomian you are. Gilbert, the artistic critic, like the mystic, is an antinomian always. To be good, according to the vulgar standard of goodness, is obviously quite easy. It merely requires a certain amount of sordid terror, a certain lack of imaginative thought, and a certain low passion for middle-class respectability. Aesthetics are higher than ethics. They belong to a more spiritual sphere. To discern the beauty of a thing is the finest point to which we can arrive. Even a color sense is more important in the development of the individual than a sense of right and wrong. Aesthetics, in fact, are to ethics in the sphere of conscious civilization what, in the sphere of the external world, sexual is to natural selection. Ethics, like natural selection, make existence possible. Aesthetics, like sexual selection, make life lovely and wonderful, fill it with new forms, and give it progress, and variety and change. And when we reach the true nature that is our aim, we attain to that perfection of which the saints have dreamed, the perfection of those to whom sin is impossible, not because they make the renunciations of the ascetic, but because they can do everything they wish without hurt to the soul, and can wish for nothing that can do the soul harm, the soul being an entity so divine that it is able to transform into elements of a richer experience, or a finer susceptibility, or a newer mode of thought, acts or passions, that with the common would be commonplace, or with the uneducated ignoble, or with the shameful vile. Is this dangerous? Yes, it is dangerous. All ideas, as I told you, are so. But the night wearies, and the light flickers in the lamp. One more thing I cannot help saying to you. You have spoken against criticism as being a sterile thing. The 19th century is a turning point in history simply on account of the work of two men, Darwin and Renan, the one the critic of the book of nature, the other the critic of the books of God. Not to recognize this is to miss the meaning of one of the most important errors in the progress of the world. Creation is always behind the age. It is criticism that leads us. The critical spirit and the world spirit are one. Ernest, and he who is in possession of this spirit, or whom this spirit possesses, will, I suppose, do nothing? Gilbert, like the Persephone of whom Landor tells us, the sweet pensive Persephone around whose white feet the asphodel and amaranth are blooming, he will sit contented in that deep, motionless quiet which mortals pity, and which the gods enjoy. He will look out upon the world and know its secret. By contact with divine things, he will become divine. His will be the perfect life, and his only. Ernest, you have told me many strange things tonight, Gilbert. You have told me that it is more difficult to talk about a thing than to do it, and that to do nothing at all is the most difficult thing in the world. You have told me that all art is immoral, and all thought dangerous, that criticism is more creative than creation, and that the highest criticism is that which reveals in the work of art what the artist had not put there, that it is exactly because a man cannot do a thing that he is the proper judge of it, and that the true critic is unfair, insincere, and not rational. My friend, you are a dreamer. Gilbert, yes, I am a dreamer. For a dreamer is one who can only find his way by moonlight, and his punishment is that he sees the dawn before the rest of the world. Ernest, his punishment. Gilbert, and his reward. But see, it is dawn already. Draw back the curtains and open the windows wide. How cool the morning air is. Piccadilly lies at our feet like a long riband of silver. A faint purple mist hangs over the park, and the shadows of the white houses are purple. It is too late to sleep. Let us go down to Covent Garden and look at the roses. Come, I am tired of thought.